So the Independent Media Alliance is an effort by myself, Whitney Webb, and Ryan Cristian of the Last American Vagabond to try to bring together voices that we think have been sane.
It is a loose gathering of people that have the same principles, the same mindset, the same integrity, the nonpartisan, objective, fact-based reporting.
Some of the voices are more new, others have been around for a decade plus, longer than myself.
And so Derek and Whitney being a part of that, I think, all of us together, I think it's profound. I mean, I think it's the time for this to happen.
It's about showing that these both sides are actually converging and headed the same direction. Maybe the Democrats call for digital ID because of COVID and vaccine passports, but the Republicans call for similar things under the guise of fixing the elections and fighting immigration and stuff like that. And so that's kind of been our larger goal, is to just show people that these two different factions, or what appear to be factions, are not on our side, and just calling that out.
Trying to show those out there who are maybe feeling a little bit lost and confused about what's going on in the world, how we should be looking at this false binary.
The federal government has been operated as a criminal enterprise on a financial basis, period.
This network of organized crime and intelligence agencies that have essentially fused their operations.
Like the British directly put their hand, like one of those long rubber gloves, right through the State Department into the middle of the CIA. And that's been going on longer than I've been alive.
Key is convergence between East and West.
Two factions of a deep state competition take place to steer the military-industrial complex in this way or that way.
We've shown you NASA, artificial intelligence, Google, quantum computing. They are embedded together.
I don't think we've ever faced anything as all-pervasive and totalitarian in its scope.
And they're going to go ahead and profit from that until somebody takes that business away from them.
I love you guys. That's why I make videos, because I care. I care about us. I care about now. I care about the future. I care about these things. These are the most important concepts we have as a human race.
I very much think the community is making waves. And it's not just our community, man. It is people that are, for the first time in their lives, finding the courage to call these things out. And I think the power structure is afraid of that.
Now, what do you actually do about it? That, to me, is always the biggest, the bigger question, right? Because we can recognize that they are there, but unless we choose to act, then they've already won.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Sunday, May 4th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Definitely some important follow-ups that we're going to get to today on a lot of different topics that we've been covering. One of the major kind of overarching topics for today, not so much as the kind of ongoing point that I think a lot of people we've been calling out, are becoming aware of the kind of double crossing of the current, of the U.S. government, and the different things that are happening now that weren't supposed to, or the things that were supposed to go a certain way that were going a different direction. But I'll address that opening clip in a second. But just in a general sense, what we're going to go through today is an important overlap, I think, around major shifts. For example, one will start off early, only because of the way I think it fits together, not necessarily as the most important, but a specifically Republican-driven Texas dynamic around illegalizing memes. And that's not how it's necessarily being framed. It is mentioned in the conversation, but it's about artificial intelligence, or even not necessarily artificial intelligence, just imaging of, satire, putting things out about people that, make a joke, or, we know how the angle there, though. We know how people are, more so the people that are pointing at the average ones on social media doing it, that are the real ones doing it, who are making actual deep, more sinister manipulations using things like that, whether AI, whether manipulative political advertisements that are meant to deceive you as opposed to make a joke. The point, though, is it's interesting to see this happening now. the left can't meme and the right, and as always, when we get into stuff like this, it's the team sport politics of either left and right side. That's all just the U.S. government manipulating everybody. And I don't think the majority is trapped by that, but feels pulled to one side or the other for large reasons, that they can't get past one or the other, but they see many of the problems. The point is that kind of left-right paradigm lie was about how the left was trying to come after that kind of conversation, not just memes, but that kind of, the point was we all recognized at a few different points, COVID, and after that, even a little before, that memes were powerful. It was a new form, not necessarily new in the sense of that, how's the easiest way to say this without going into a long conversation? Memes in general are not a new concept, but it's new in the terms of how the internet can proliferate these things. And even the way we see memes today, memes can be called just a certain phrase that circulates, right? The point is that memes through the internet and social media were very powerful and seen to have a lot of influence. That I think is an important conversation. So we're going to touch on how that is being applied from the wrong side, it seems. But again, the real picture being that it's a two-party illusion. It's a power structure trying to convince us that what we don't want to happen is ultimately what we should want, or some variation therein. We'll also talk about the overlap of that in regard to Israel that I'm only going to do a couple points on today. Tomorrow we will be doing a show, and I'm going to make sure we go in deep on the overlap of this topic of Israel, how many incredibly obvious ways every day that are new on top of the thousands of other ways we have, showing that Israel is influencing, controlling, dictating U.S. policy. And I mean, it's coming from the highest levels of power at this point, guys. It's coming from people at very prestigious positions in the media, whether, not to say we should trust or okay, but the point is, nonetheless, perceived as prestigious, or people in the government, very highly regarded podcast. I mean, all over the place. People are calling this stuff out, ex-CIA agents. And we'll talk about how that dovetails with the attack on the flotilla, which again, tomorrow I'm going to do more of a deep conversation about that and overarching points. But today I wanted to make sure you saw it. But as that relates to these conversations, think about the ability to get away with something like that, as we'll go into more tomorrow, of just attacking a ship. If you haven't seen it, we'll go into it briefly today. A ship full of people trying to bring aid, which is not a new conversation. The Freedom Flotilla has been going on a long time. We've covered it on this show, and being attacked, full of innocent people. Really no pushback from the world governments fighting terrorism. Now, we're also going to talk about the conversation, the evolving conversation around deportations in El Salvador. Again, sort of like the COVID-19 point, there's a lot of people months into that were going, you guys are just talking about this like crazy. Why don't you talk about something else? This is such an old story. You're overhyping it. And then clearly we all have come to realize that that's probably still one of the most important stories we've ever covered. Same point around this. Now, people disagree about whether, there's all sorts of political polls in this conversation. What's amazing to me is how obviously this is connected with core, foundational arguments from either side of the paradigm, and it gets people dismissive. They dismiss the topic, act like we shouldn't care. Well, and I don't want to pull into it to start. We'll go into it as I get to the topic today. But it's amazing to me how this has just been stepped on by a lot of people that should know better and probably do. But how it's evolved beyond the story, how it's now kind of cascaded into making the same thing that was already happening in the beginning. Using subjective emotional points to make you think this person was what they suggested he was, even though the evidence clearly showed that it wasn't the case, or that the evidence wasn't there. So it pulls into, well, he also did this, and look, his wife said that, none of which actually matters to the only point around Garcia in particular that mattered, which was he didn't get due process to prove the claims they had, because the claims weren't true. And we can prove that today. And regardless of whether you think that or not, that's not even the conversation. It's whether or not they went through the normal process. And that's why accusing Americans or threatening to send Americans to a foreign prison clearly matters, and how this is a stepping stone. Or Khalil, for example, before this even happened, where we now know, and we can clearly prove yet again, that it was all based on speech in Israel and targeting him to be removed, or any number of examples we'll go through today again. But how this has developed, and now it's gotten so abstract, how many different examples we have of judges, including Trump-appointed judges, or all 6 conservatives on the Supreme, or at least the first one, Supreme Court judges, conservatives included, all of them in the beginning, clearly highlighting that these things are problems, due process was not given, and how this conversation has evolved to a very dangerous point, to where now we're hearing conversations about paying foreign prisons more than El Salvador to take, some bad people from the country. And some weird overlap to that about whether Americans are included, and especially having an amendment, which is the core point today, being voted down by Republicans that simply said, let's establish that you can't deport Americans. that there's no air in that conversation. There's no wiggle room, that you cannot legally deport Americans. And they all voted, well, the majority of Republicans voted it down. Let's be clear again, this is not about a left and right thing, but these things have pull for certain sides during certain moments. But maybe it is in this moment in your mind just a right thing. But do not be fooled by that, because the left, as always, or the right, as always, will swing around when the time comes and have a different narrative for why the same thing should be happening. But this is really important. We're going to get to now. The latter part of that, we're going to of the show will be around RFK Jr., HHS, a vaccine platform that is now coming out on top of everything else. Basically, another. I shouldn't call it a Stargate project, because Stargate is a much bigger thing than what it was being presented as, but it's another platform, a universal flu vaccine platform. Now, it doesn't seem to be mRNA. Now, that seems to be the way this is being put out. And hey, maybe that's a positive step. You guys can decide for yourselves. I think that what's happening here is more than likely exactly the way this was supposed to go. Call me a pessimist. The point is that this is happening on top of everything else we've seen, the continuation of other mRNA platforms, mRNA shots for bird flu, MMR shots being called safe and effective. All of this matters. And then, of course, the Stargate cancer platform, which will be more than that. And the fact that this is happening on top of everything else is so damn concerning to me. And of course, on top of that, CRISPR and fake pork, GMO foods being allowed in this administration, despite all of the conversations around RFK and GMOs. And it's just one more example of how something clearly is wrong. Now, I could give you all day what I think that is and whether I think he's lying or it was always a ploy, but you need to decide that. Just first and foremost, acknowledge the things we're discussing are happening, and don't try to just assume into an explanation for why it must be because of X, Y, and Z. Just acknowledge the problem and then wait to find more information and hold their feet to the fire. Left or right, up, down, doesn't matter. It's a government. It should matter that we hold them accountable. Now, I started with a clip that I think is important that you might not have seen. We just put this out on, before I put this back on the wrong page, I put this out today that was actually part of a documentary that T. Snyder put out. You've seen him on Wake Up. I think he's on Thursdays every week. Really intelligent guy, great guy in general. And I wanted to put, he basically put a mini doc, which I put down here, that's just about Derek Bros, which had some overlap because Tease has been going around filming for this kind of, what he's doing is sort of, I think it's loosely around the IMA in general, or that's kind of ended up happening that way. But the point is, he's been following us throughout for a while now. And he's been filming these that go back months. And as they overlap with the next person, he kind of gets overlapping coverage there. Now, he recently was here because Steve was here and the carnival was happening, and he got some overlap with us as well, which is where some of this comes from. And so he cut this in with the part that for basically Derek's mini documentary. Tease, I think, plans to make this into a larger, like all of them in one, like either mixed or just kind of succession of these documentaries. So look for that. But he put out Derek so far. And we all kind of thought that there was a section like I showed you there to play that was about the IMA that I thought would make a really good sort of outline for what we want and what we think. And I think he did just first and foremost, he did an amazing job on that. He is a very talented person. And I wanted to say, be sure to support Tease, who made the outstanding mini doc that we made the clip from. He's currently working on one of myself included that was focused just on me. We were filming for a few days around that and a bunch of others, but he really does a lot of work on this, works very hard. And as you know well, guys, today, doing the right things for the right reasons really does not pay. So make sure you support what he's doing, because he's working really hard just to get the truth out there for the right reasons. And I believe it's up to him. And I think he's already said he wants to do it. I'm going to try to platform his whole series on TLAV as well, where he has his website, Conspiracy Synergy, but we're going to try to put it on TLAV just so we can help drive more revenue to what he's doing and support that whole drive, because I think it's very important. But website coming soon. Just so you guys know, it's I shouldn't even say this because I don't, not like some other projects you've heard that constantly go, hey, here's the thing that will be here. And that's been like 8 years and it's not coming. The point is that this is genuinely going on in the background. We keep talking with them. They keep giving us updates about what's going to be coming, or what they're fixing and adding and so on. And right now, I guess he feels really confident that we should be seeing this coming soon. But as you guys know, when you build these new websites, especially the one like they're doing, which overlaps with, it's essentially a new decentralized internet dynamic, which is incredible. We'll be one of the first platforms to be on there, or just like groups, I guess, seeing as how we all still have our individual platforms and there's no financial mechanism just for the IMA. It's each of us individually. And I was adamant about that. The point is that essentially it's once we get this up, I lost my thread. The point is that this thing has, this kind of projects have problems as you're building, like with Super U we had, as you're building it, there can be things that you don't see coming or things that cause other problems in other areas. The point is, it's a really neat dynamic that is going to be unique to us, at least for now, and it will be coming out soon. And we'll be sharing some new things with you coming up. And really, again, to reiterate what it's going to be is sort of a website where you'll see the central page will be the IMA content, our panels, our different round table, whatever we're doing that's IMA focused. And then each time you'll be able to, if you like what I said that day, or if you like what Derek said, you can go to the individual platform and go to Derek's and donate to him directly. And that's the way it will be. And once we get this up and running, we'll go back to what we had, we had plans to bring new people in, to highlight some smaller creators. We kind of decided to put a lot of that on hold until we got the site so we could really showcase it. So just, what's going on. I'm really excited about this. And I just, like I said, I think this is powerful. I really do. So thank you for your support thus far. Here is the documentary. You can check it out. Here is Teese's page on YouTube. Please support him. It's just amazing work. Now, I wanted to start with a small thing here. Just it kind of relates to Twitter and some different points that I wasn't going to include, and I didn't know where else to fit it in. So I just wanted to bang it out really quickly here that I think is interesting. And it's something that we've been covering and talking about. I guess the easiest way to put it is the kind of the social engineering kind of algorithmic experimentation that's happening on Twitter. And it's just really, really interesting to me how clear this is. And so bottom line is, I had this pulled over. I wanted to look back at this as the many tabs that I saved for myself over the days. This random account, which by the way, I'll show you, doesn't look at his comments and so on. And I'm pretty, misguided person. Let's put it that way. But that's the different side from the point. He says, nobody has been arrested. How is he a hero? Now he's responding to somebody talking about, I think it's Kash Patel and different arrests. And you look through his account. I mean, he's calling out Trump. And even though he's clearly supporting of the general mission, is a lot of Republicans are going like, where are the arrests, right? And it's not just Epstein. It's about all the different claims. Doge found all this theft. Okay, why is nobody in prison? You know what I mean? Like it's endless that keeps happening, and it's very clear. And a lot of Republicans are getting pretty unhappy about it. So point was, I wanted to save it so I could make a point about it, but I realized I couldn't see what was above it. It's a comment to somebody else, and I couldn't scroll down. And so this person simply says, remind me, and this was the point I was going to reference, does he work for the FBI? Oh, wait, no, that's not his responsibility. Or actually, it was about RFK or something like that. And then the point was she's making is that, well, it's not his responsibility, even though it's kind of a sidestep, right? The idea is that they're accusing people of things and no one's actually trying to see the accountability. Now, that was what I was going to get to, not the point for now. It's not letting me see it. Okay. So I decided I'm going to look for it because I know it's there. I have the tweet, right? And I searched for the word arrested for his account. It's not there. Like, you can scroll down, you can look. There's a lot of comments about it, but what you'll notice is a lot of the ones on here are not the ones that, like the ones that I'll show you next. There's only so many on here. The point is, you won't find the one I'm looking for, or just more in particular, nobody has been arrested, which is exactly what that says. Direct search for it, and it says it's not there. Now, the point I'm making is that I think there's a very clear effort to suppress content that is leading down paths of conversation that is not adherent to the current view, or many different aspects of that across this platform. Or maybe we're all in different little corrals where they're getting different experiments. I don't know. But I do think we need to continue to highlight whether Trump's tweet about bringing in the CIA now, that you will not be able to find unless you have the link, which I've saved, and I still have it. It's still there. But no matter how many times you search for it, it just doesn't show it. Or Elon Musk. I've made this point 100 times. This may be small to people that just don't want to care, or they're maybe think it's all a good thing on Twitter, or he's saving free speech. But it does matter. These things are important. It shows you that either there's a mistake on this platform that is not, so just know there's not always all the information there, which is not what they're projecting, or it's being censored, or rather, I guess, selectively withheld in certain points of the conversation. So continuing down this, can't find it. Here's another example, just to show you this guy is making these comments. This is under Kash, where he goes, how many holdovers have you neglected to fire? Interesting point on that is that they keep making this claim, right? That, oh, it's an old Democrat holdover. Or even with Brooke Jackson, who I'll be interviewing day after tomorrow, who at least at one point was her lawyer. I don't know if he still is, but it was, I'm blanking on his name, with Viva Frey and Robert Barnes, who just kind of stated that must be holdovers that were causing that from the DOJ. Everyone seems to kind of just lurch into that conversation with no evidence because it gives them the benefit of the doubt. Which, as he's saying, well, how many holdovers have you neglected to fire? Or why aren't they now in prison if that's what you guys know? It never seems to materialize. Here's another one with this person saying, RFK Jr. stated on live TV the Biden administration, HHS, was complicit in child trafficking. Well, you're probably the case with both sides. They go, everyone knows that. Where are the arrests? See, this is an important way to think of this. How can you make such major claims about human trafficking and not even an investigation going, at least so we're shown? Now what you get is, well, they can't just all do it in one day. Okay, fair enough. You show me when it happens. And until then, don't scream that everything's going the way you want it to because you don't know that. What we get are statements. Things are bad. This is happening. I'm going to investigate this. This is going to end. Well, when they do those things, let's talk about it. That's not to say that I think they won't. I mean, truly, I don't believe in left or right. I think they're all against you. So I probably am doubtful, but I'm going to leave it open because it could. And I know that. So it's interesting that we don't see these things. Nick Sorter says, holy crap, Doge uncovered a massive arsenal of weapons and payments to the Taliban. I mean, are these guys actually not informed, or are they just knowingly trying to play this one-sided game? Could be both. Are we really going to pretend like the Trump's administration and Biden's and more than that before weren't not all completely involved with this whole dynamic? You can prove this stuff. Now, just because it happened under, like, I guess we have our housefly memory dynamic, meaning that we don't have a long memory in the country, where they could just pretend like all we know is the last so many years of Biden's administration. Donald Trump was involved in the exact same dynamics. They just inherited it and handed down. So the Taliban was, I mean, let's be real. The whole idea was that the Taliban was the focus. They were the ones that we went to war with, and then Trump was dealing with them. They were supplying weapons, same thing. But here's the main point of the point today, because they even deleted a vast amount of financial information. Cool. Where are the arrests? That's his point. Our worthless DOJ won't even prosecute criminals they see daily walking through the White House. Good luck with that. You know what I mean? And so it's funny as you get this crowd of like Nick Sorters and Benny Johnsons that are just like, yay, cheerlead, everything all the time. We're winning. It's great. And maybe they believe it. I don't know. But then you have another layer of these people that want the same things, but are not paid to cheerlead every day and are going, that's not going to make a difference, but still want the same things. Roger Stone says, vengeance is not coming. Justice is coming. Same guy says, not as long as Trump's president. And he understand, look at his feet. He supports Trump. Trump protects the deep state just like he does Hillary, which is he's admitted to. Now, it seems like he's getting uncomfortable or growing tired of it all. But then see you look through his account. This is the kind of stuff that people are circulating. He says, coming to America. This is Concerned Citizen with almost 1 million followers. And says, young girl forced to marry 40-year-old man against her will is beyond sick, which I guarantee you happens all over the world, including places that you don't want to pretend it happens. Or like Israel, for example, or the UK. It happens. My point is that's not what this is. And I've seen this video before. It's actually where this person was caught. You can read about it, and maybe that's the lie, but this is your Grok fact check. It says, in reality, involved a shop employee who admitted to stealing money from her employer. And when they were apprehended, they refused to sign the confession that they all had, that she'd actually stolen. They knew it, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you put that video out, it looks pretty crazy, right? Concerned Citizen is one of these Republican sort of influencing types that came off the COVID-19 timeframe that influences a lot of conversation. Coming to America, except it's not real, right? Now, that's not to say that there's not an obvious overlap there. Let's not forget about, even with the European migrant crisis that's still ongoing, but from before. Well, what did we hear? Boris told us ISIS is going to infiltrate through the migrant. Yeah, and what is ISIS again? Oh, that's right. The U.S. Israeli proxy army that we know they've been funding and arming and supporting. So let's think about real weaponized migration and how they are using these things. And that does not make the groups that are being used necessarily the problem. But that's how this tends to work, right? And we're all being driven by these radical, racist, maniac, apartheid-loving, fascist, technocrat, globalists, or whatever you want to call it. And it's clear to me that we're being misled to hate the people that are being used within it. Now, that's not to say there's not radicals in every culture that you can find. They abuse them. Trust me. One more point on this. Now, before I go past that, the only reason I brought this up again was I want you to recognize how clearly this platform is so dedicated, in my opinion, to corralling certain perspectives. So, and I'll make a note about my following. I probably should have done next, which is happening constantly right now. Before that, one other point here I thought was interesting. I keep getting this everywhere. Now, this could have something to do with what's going on. I make certain posts about certain things, and it's only around certain content. For example, this Aviva Klampus Zionist manipulator says the masterminds behind the beeper bomb that eliminated Hezbollah leaders, which it didn't as far as I can tell, were honored at Israel's Independence Day ceremony. And I said, remember, the vast majority of those killed in this attack were women and children, according to their own statistics, guys. because it was easy to prove, and it was markets and 10 years of circulation, and they have masks on. How creepy. Like, these people are very aware that we all know what's going on. And of course, the point is, every time I make certain comments about certain things, I get stuff like this, which they never used to block me first. This person now has me blocked, which is interesting. So what they do is they comment under your post and go, hey, come invest with this random guy who now, look, Twitter's suspended his account. Never came across someone like this. They're trying to get you to invest in crypto or something else. And I immediately block the person they're trying to promote, and I usually block the account. Nowadays, they are blocking me before I can do it. This is a coordinated thing. The reason I bring it up is because I think this is about the tactics that Twitter is using, or somebody involved with Twitter. I'm not saying Elon Musk, but some level of influence that are using things like this to suppress, like they say, if you use links or hashtags, it suppresses your reach. That's just censorship is all it is. It's suppression. So in this, I think when you have enough of those sex bots or enough of these weird people, and then they block you, maybe it creates some kind of a suppression tactic that triggers a thing on this platform that they created for that reason. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And the fact they blocked me ahead of time, I think makes it so I can't see it. I don't know. But I wanted to point it out because I think this stuff is happening prolifically right now. Very weird. Now let me do this real quick before I forget. What I try to do normally is hide them and then block it. And hopefully maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's what's causing censorship. I don't know. Lastly, I wanted you guys to see this because this is happening to, I see Republicans out there making statements like this. I did this first one so you can see the date, April 30th. It said 74,564. There was a moment there where we were going up pretty rapidly, even with all that was going on. Every single day now, and I'm watching tons of people following still every day, but it goes down every day. Now, the next day I checked and look, now it's at 537. Today I just checked and it's at 74,526. Now look for yourself. If maybe people just don't like me anymore. Certainly possible. I'm never assuming one way or the other. But what's funny is with Social Blade, where you could track this stuff, suddenly Twitter doesn't let it work anymore. Now you can't look at them. I'm sure there's new ones being built. My point is, I think all of this is about social engineering. And what they're doing is slowly suppressing and removing. And it's very important to see. Look, we have more reach than ever today, more reach than ever, and everywhere else and other platforms. But you telling me on the platform, it just doesn't add up, guys. Despite all the following that we continue to get every day that I can see, something very strange is going on. Now, that aside, I wanted to go back to the point about the double crossing, if you will. There's many ways you can frame it. I'll play this clip from David Icke first, which kind of sets the tone for the play of the independent media. That he says all those in the fake alternative media, or he calls the mainstream alternative media, that promoted Trump as the savior should surely apologize to those they misled. The reason he's saying this is not, he thinks this, and you know that, but I'm not the only one picking up on this in the field. You can see it. Look at their comments. Look at under Jones or Johnson. Look at the comments from their supporters. They're on the fence right now. They're going, come on, where's the evidence? Even though if you put them to a choice, they would still side with them, which is my opinion anyway. But the point is, they're really trying to mask this very weird, unnerving, and at the same time trying to go, there's an effort to divide the Trump administration by psyops. And no. They're just not stupid. They're not blind idiots that are following along with the screamers up top. They're still on Trump's side, but they're unhappy with the outcome. And they're trying to play that as some kind of a division psyop. Now, of course, it's certainly possible that's the case. But I think we can all see, if you're objective and nonpartisan, that the way this is going, if you were in the middle of the COVID-19 psyop and you said what would happen next, you'd be pointing at exactly what Trump and the current U.S. government is rolling out. Do you think he knows that? Maybe he's being played. Doesn't change the reality of what's actually happening. He says some are now criticizing him when they should have seen all along what he would do. It was pretty obvious to a lot of us. Others are doubling down to avoid saying the obvious, as in, I was duped again and then duped you. He says, how many have apologized for being blatant propagandists for a tyranny so predictable it was pathologically easy to call? He says, and it's only just begun. Politics is not the answer, left or right, and never will be. We are, as in you, the people. Always important. Now, again, whether you agree with everything David Icke has to say, I recommend you look into his work because he's largely misrepresented in a lot of ways and does have some pretty esoteric and even stuff that I would say I'd maybe not agree with that. The bottom line is he's, in my opinion, a man of integrity, and he stands by what he believes in, and he's been calling this out for a long time. Look back at what he's been saying. Again, consistency is very important, especially today. Here's what he had to say.
Take a president And he told people what they wanted to hear in this election campaign, that he was the peacemaker president and he was going to stop wars and he was not going to do this and not going to do that. As we speak, he's bombed Yemen, he's bombed Somalia, he's supplying the weapons to bomb Gaza.
Iran,
Iran. He's threatening Iran. He's threatening countries like Greenland. He's threatening Canada in terms of absorbing them into the 51st state, threatening Panama, threatening Mexico, and saying that the Palestinians need to be moved out of Gaza to other countries. And
just quick note, remember all the names he listed off there. It'll be relevant in the show a little bit later.
And they're going to take it over and turn it into a bloody Mediterranean resort. Now, none of this was spoken about in the election campaign, which got him elected. And now he's doing so much that he said he wouldn't do. And that's how it works, because the MAGA to Trump and people like Musk and these other people are simply vote fodder. That's all you are, ladies and gentlemen, to these parties. You're voting fodder to get them into office, and then they do as they bloody like.
And it's what's interesting is you can look back. I mean, it's just so, again, the point of like that, the joke of the attention span of a housefly meant to be just like erratic, and the memory is not there. The point is that you could look back very recently, whether it's UK politics or not, which we look from an American-centric view for obvious reasons. But if you look at this, these conversations are not new. Even like the Boris Johnson, Trump, like they're emulating each other. And it's not just those. Look around the world. What's wild is that they've made these cases before, right? All that matters is emotion. There's leaked evidence of people, I think, from every election dynamic in this country, UK, where they're basically caught saying the facts don't matter. It's all about what you think and feel. Remember the Newt Gingrich point that I've been making for a decade. When the first time I saw him say that blew me away, and now it's the policy, and we know that, but yet people still seem to fall in line because they believe. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have faith, to believe in somebody, not faith. That's not the right word when it comes to the conversation. The point is, because that means you're giving the benefit of the doubt. Do you believe in him regardless? That's not where you should be. But the point is that you need to start holding their feet to the fire, in particular when you support them, for the worry that maybe they aren't the person you think they are. This blind drive to support them no matter what it's their bread and butter. And so things like this, I think, are pretty interesting. This is from Revolver. Texas just turned into the UK, which is interesting because remember the whole thing, before and in the beginning of the selection process with Musk and pointing over at the UK and the Muslims and everything interesting, driving and creating a momentum in the Twitter conversation about foreign elections and all sorts of stuff. And the point was the UK was allowing the problem in a very simplistic way. There's 45 conversations under that. But now the GOP House passes dystopian bill criminalizing memes. And I'll read you what we're talking about, because it's not as specific as just memes are not allowed, but it's important to understand this. Now, here's the actual bill from the Texas, which is Texas legislature. It's weird that it just looks like this, like type, but you can tell up here it's capitaltexas.gov, and it's HB number HB 366, relating to required disclosures on certain political advertising that contains to altered media. Now, they don't really differentiate to where like a deliberate intent to misinform or not, which frankly, again, if we're talking free speech, it does not matter. That's the thing, is they're trying to drive us into choosing lines around this if they frame it about the people you don't like. That's always how this works, whether it's a foreign entity, migrants, or in this case, the bad, evil left or the right who wants to attack you. They do it to where you then rationalize what you otherwise wouldn't, because either they've been dehumanized or you've been trained to hate them irrationally, which emotion should not play a factor in any of this stuff. It says creating a criminal offense, be it enacted by the legislature of the state of Texas. Remember, Texas being in particular one of the most problematic areas when it comes to anti-BDS laws, pro-Israel legislation. We're going to talk again more today about the anti-boycott law that's happening and it's about to go forward in this country. It's everywhere. Republicans are calling it out. Now, of course, if you listen to Tim Pool, he'll tell you that it's a very small minority. It's not, guys. Pay attention. Look at the Republican Party. There are people everywhere who are calling this stuff out, and they get shouted down or masked or, suppressed, kind of overshadowed by those screaming people up top that want you to think everybody's on their side. Now it says Section 255-0015 required disclosure on certain political advertising. And I should have said that's the main point, is that if you do these things, you're supposed to put a big disclaimer on it saying this is altered media. Criminal penalty. It says a person may not cause to be published, distributed, or broadcast, which is interesting to me, broadcast political advertising that includes an image, audio recording, or video recording of an office holder's or candidate's appearance, speech, or conduct that did not occur in reality, including an image, audio recording, or video recording that has been altered using artificial intelligence technology, unless the political advertising includes a disclosure indicating that the image, audio recording, or video recording did not occur in reality. Now, I'm willing to bet you this is it's very broad and opaque, like as always, very undefined, because does it have to be a certain size? Where does it have to be? This will be a way to remove content they don't like, even if it's like, oh, whoops, we did have a disclaimer, we didn't see it, we'll get back to it, and then 6 weeks later it goes back up. Like this is an effort to further the line, to continue the suppression of speech and conversation, and in particular around political conversation. Gee, you think that has something to do with Israel? I mean, it's obvious. It's very transparent what this all connects to right now. Now, what's interesting on top of it is what we're talking about here is just AI technology manipulating things. But as we'll get into in a second, it's really, they make a point to say it's not even necessarily AI. Just a meme, let's say, that you make a joke about and say this person lied, or, this happens every day. But let's realize the most egregious examples we've seen all come from state actors, usually the US, Israel, the UK, things like that. And so it's interesting that they're making this about you. Do you think this will apply to things that they put out? Will the US government be called out for putting out false information, or Israel for being caught lying about videos they create? I guarantee that won't happen. My opinion, obviously, but I'm pretty certain about that, seeing as how we've seen in the past, unless we see another shift, which I hope comes. But it says the commission by rule shall prescribe the form of a disclosure required by subsection A, including the font size. Oh, I missed that earlier. How did I miss that? So it does say font size and color of the disclosure, but see, I have to look at subsection A here and see if it's specific enough. I get the sense that it's going to be somewhere where they can play with the definition, which is pretty much everything the government puts out. It says the commission shall ensure that the form of the disclosure is consistent with other required disclosures on political advertising. Again, political advertising is not what we're involved in, but I'll go into the actual, the numbers around it too. But it says a person commits an offense if the person violates this section. An offense under this section is a class A misdemeanor, which apparently could be up to a year in jail for a meme. Now, what happens if I share a meme? What happens if I'm live streaming Twitter and a meme is in the background that they think, like, remember this from the UK bill that came around where they were saying if you've got like a Coke can in the back of the shot, you weren't allowed, they'd take the video down. These are the same things. Or the child safety act, all under the guise of something else around trying to suppress content. Now, here's a clip of somebody, actually blanking on her name, I was just reading about it, and who stood up, who basically pushes back on this.
So this bill is a class A misdemeanor?
That is correct.
So what are the consequences for this? Could you explain that to me?
Well, you would have to, of course, it would go to the district attorney's office, and a class A misdemeanor is, let me see if I have the actual penalties in front of me.
Excuse me?
Yeah, it's up to a year in jail. Yes, ma'am.
So up to a year in jail?
Correct.
I've been to jail for 3 days for working. Do you think that that's a fair punishment for someone creating an image or a meme?
Well, it's a very serious offense.
Up to a year in jail, sir.
Well,
that's crazy. Now, of course, what's interesting is that you're getting, like right now, you're getting divide amongst the GOP in this discussion, which I think is important. But it just serves to show you that this is not about partisanship, guys. It's about whatever else is driving that conversation, and then anybody who has the integrity to call it out. Now, here is Texas scorecard. April 30th, this came out. It says the Texas House has approved legislation by former Speaker Dade Phelan, that's who was speaking, I believe, that would criminalize the distribution of altered political media. such as memes, videos, or audio recordings, unless they contain a government-mandated disclaimer. Despite tweaks in the issues with the first, with the free speech and just your rights in general, it's obvious right there that you somehow have to slap a government disclaimer on things. The area of abuse will be tremendous. Now it says, despite tweaks in a recently adopted committee substitute, the bill continues to face intense criticism from the First Amendment advocates who warn it would chill political speech and satire. Now, just on an obvious point, people may decide not to put something out for fear that they might cross that line. That alone is enough to point out. And it says, originally pitched as a response to AI-generated deep fakes. See, whether it's what I've always talked about, which I still argue is going to play a role, has to at some point, or just pointing at that problem they've created as the rationale for why other things need to happen, it's interesting how this plays. But the deep fake was always going to be a tool in all this. It says House Bill 366 is significantly broader in scope than the original discussion. The current version makes clear that it doesn't just apply to artificial intelligence, but also to any image, audio, or video that, quote, did not occur in reality. So now you can't even make a joke meme about something because it didn't. Well, so I guess humor is gone, right? No satire whatsoever. Because, realize that the point I made earlier, whether it's memes or like a Babylon Bee or whatever the other platforms are the, what's the other ones? There's many of them that come out and basically, make jokes about things and then weirdly almost predict what happens later. There's a reason that's become more profound and has more reach, and I recognize that. I have a great interview coming out probably tomorrow or the next day with Grant Elman. Presence Elman is a musician, very talented. Actually did a live performance on the interview where we get into all of that and about how, basically the manipulation. It's easy to see how the industry can manipulate things. I'll put that out probably tomorrow, and it's important to see. It's really great conversation about his work, and it was interesting. But the point is, the current version makes clear it doesn't apply just to artificial intelligence, but also to any image, audio, or video that did not occur in reality, a definition that includes the basic Photoshop edits and parody. Now, it says under the substitute, the bill now technically applies only to individuals or entities who fall into one of three categories. Now, this was pushback, right? Before, it was wildly broad, and it still is, but now they've added a little bit arguably trying to give it limits, but it seems as always that this is easy to just make anybody fit into these categories. It says under the substitute, you have three categories: office holders, candidates, or political committees. So that's obvious, right? So that's where I think this would even apply if you were going to get into the conversation about people who are running for office lying about people they're running against. This is why I don't think there should be any of this stuff. Put your policies out there, no political advertising at all. Or lobbying that is where the problem always starts, but it'll never happen because these people are, if you still think your vote translates, then we're way down the line. My point though, is that's where it should, if you're going to do this, it should apply to people doing it about their adversaries in regard to politics. That makes sense. But obviously the point would be about just if you're, look, if you're going to err on the side of free speech in general, it shouldn't matter. As long as money's not involved, people can lie all they want. Right. That's the reality of it. But logically speaking, if there was going to be a group it would apply to, it would be that first one. Now it says those who spend more than $100, this is category 2, on political advertising during a reporting period. But and that doesn't seem to apply just to people who are candidates or office holders. People who spend more than $100 on political advertising. Now the article explains that well enough and how that could be used against you. And it says anyone who publishes or distributes such content for compensation. Well, that's like when I was in the which maybe there still may be 3 more coming. I hope not. But the lawsuits we were dealing with, the argument they were making is about how much money we were bringing in because of an image that was on the site that I was under the impression was Creative Commons, and still I argue still probably was. The point is that I very quickly broke down how that was just a complete misrepresentation. That it was the money that the TLAV brings in is through donations that largely have to do with people donating directly because they believe in the platform, not because I'm generating ad revenue on that website, the one page, right? So the same thing is they could make an allegation about how if you do any of this simply because you've got money coming in through anything or because you they'll say it down here, decide to pay to boost something because you think it's funny. They could apply this. I think that's exactly what this is about. Someone who pays for a boosted meme or designs politically content using paid tools like Facebook, Twitter. Now it says the bill also adds on intent to influence an election requirement. which they said that about the Facebook memes and everything else. Easily applied to whatever they want. It says, while framed as a safeguard, opponents note that nearly all campaign speech exists to influence elections, making the clause effectively toothless. Exactly. Or all-encompassing. Now it says the measures stems from a mailer sent during Palin's re-election campaign. See, it becomes personal, in which an outside group depicted him alongside Nancy Pelosi to draw attention to shared donors. Okay, so was the impression that he was literally, I mean, it just seems like such a ridiculous effort. You could make a graphic that showed them standing in the same shot. Doesn't necessarily mean they were in the same shot. It's just, this is a child's example of somebody who didn't like how they were depicted, who then take it further. And my point would be there are people that are, above them that go, this we can use and jump in and drive it. That's what I would argue. Who knows? But it says, while he claimed the law wouldn't touch social media, TEC General Counsel James Tinley acknowledged that political content posted online could, in fact, fall under the bill's jurisdiction. I would argue the entire point. Lastly, it says, approved 102 to 40. So let that sink in. 102 people in the Texas legislature believe that they should make this pass. Now being sent over to the Senate, which doesn't seem like it'll probably pass. Nonetheless, incremental steps forward. Now in, excuse me, Texas House passes bill banning Texans under 18 from having social media accounts. You see where this is going? Very clearly related to what I argue is Texas in particular, which is, like we said earlier, a very important conversation around Israel's influence, BDS. All of this happening now seems very, very telling to me. Now, actually, let me play this first, since I was going to play it afterward, but I think it will keep it in your mind is important for this point around why they may want to do that. Now, of course, it's always about protecting your children. Or maybe it's about this.
I also want to point out that we have a major generational problem. All the polling I've seen, ADL's polling, ICC's polling, independent polling, suggests this is not a left-right gap, folks. The issue in the United States in support for Israel is not left and right. It is young and old. And so we really have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem, that our community needs to put the same brains that gave us TLAV, the same brains that gave us all these other amazing innovations, need to put our energy toward this, like, fast. Because again, like, we've been chasing this left-right divide. It's the wrong game.
Mm-hmm.
The real game is the next generation. We saw a dramatic change in the language of the activists here in America on October the 8th. The language of groups that we've long tracked who've long been problematic, like Students for Justice in Palestine and
Jewish group.
Jewish Voices for Peace.
Jewish Voice for Peace, Jewish group, right? That they're claiming are problems. They're Jewish community, like all of this, like Colombia, for example, was a mix of Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Holocaust survivors, and yet they still tried to frame them all as radical, anti-Jewish, like insane. And to this day, it's insane how obvious it was not the way they framed it, and yet still people scream it online, like every other part of this conversation. But what I says next is chilling for those that care, which is that with this Israeli group, which is basically a spy organization, has plants inside of Jewish groups in the United States. They report back to Israel.
Because our analysts are in their groups.
Mm-hmm.
We saw this again on October the 8th. It was that fast. Like, the language in their toolkits was all about the Zionist entity.
Exactly. I might as well play these since we're talking about it.
Is an Israeli spy organization masking around as a supposed civil rights group and doing real harm to the Jewish community writ large in order to run cover for the state of Israel. They also have the power to monitor social media activity across all major platforms and change social media algorithms the way they see fit. Don't believe me? Well, here's Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL.
We work with YouTube to get them to change their algorithms. We work with Facebook on trying to use a redirect method, so when you search for Holocaust, you get directed to like a Yad Vashem page.
We opened a center in Silicon Valley back in...
You get it. I've played that many times. The point is, great discussion. Make sure you watch James Lee's documentary. It's a short one on that very topic. It is. I mean, there's plenty of examples coming from U.S. intelligence. People that were there that tell you this is a spy organization. They're spying on Americans, and I'll play some clips right now. They're going to be pretty shocking if you haven't heard this before. The U.S. government knows what this is, and they are allowing Israel to spy on you. They're allowing Israel to at least petition deportations from this country, including Americans. It's all right in front of you. Now, this, coming back to this point, is why this is happening, in my opinion. Now, there's plenty of other overlaps you can talk about, just suppression, the spreading of conversations amongst, social media for a certain generation. Now, I shouldn't say it like, clearly there are generational differences based on if you're older, whether you use it more or not. My point is that the new generation being introduced to what's happening now, I think is profoundly problematic for the power structure. And so I think that's why this is happening along with a lot of other things. Now, what it says, State Representative Jared Patterson, who authored the House Bill 186, said the legislation was born out of concern over the mental health and safety of young users. Now, here's what's fascinating about this. Absolutely a real concern, but they never cared up until it started butting up against their chosen allies out in the world. Think about how wild it is that we've known this. You've got Facebook founders decade ago telling you that they don't let their children touch this stuff because we basically ruin the planet or whatever they were saying. We know all of this. It is detrimental to but here's the point. The government should have nothing to do with any of this. That is for the parents of children and whoever else to deal with. That's their responsibility. Every day, the government finds ways to work itself in between the family unit. And that's another example of that. Why they should have to create laws to say whether children are allowed to use something that the parent, there are parents out there that let their 5-year-old kid watch rated R movies or whatever. And that's your prerogative. So to argue that this is going to be something that they have to decide is never about whether it's healthy for you or your children. That's my opinion, obviously, but just look back, look at the history. Like they care about your children's mental health, but they'll lock them down for a couple years and make them lose their minds because of a lie, right? They don't care. It says, due to constant social media use, self-harm rates have skyrocketed, or it was because of the lockdowns and social distancing and all of that's what actually caused that skyrocket. We all know that. Now they're just using this to frame it somewhere else. And of course, I would argue that, yes, this does have a factor in that, probably by design, but what they're doing is hiding what was caused by what they did. By and large, there's plenty of peer-reviewed science around it. Up 48% for boys and a staggering 188 for girls, which also that overlaps with the obvious transgender psyop that was, largely focused on young girls more than anything. Either way, we've talked about that a lot. And it says suicide rates for boys rose 91%, 67% for girls. And that's, of course, in regard to the same conversation. In a recent Pew study, 48% of teens admitted that social media harms people their age. Patterson also cited a recent study by the Wall Street Journal, which found an Instagram account for a 13-year-old saw 3 times as many prohibited posts containing nudity, 1.7 times as much violence, and 4.1 times as much bullying content as users above the age of 30. Okay? The idea that you would then make that what you're telling us right there is that those young accounts somehow got introduced to these things more than the age of 30, even though they both use the platform. Is that the child's fault? Or are you literally highlighting that the platforms are the ones corralling in these ways and social engineering? Is that so? Then the idea of STEAM is, I agree, these things are terrible, but that is for the child or the family and the parents to make these decisions. And if you're a good parent out there, you damn well better get this stuff out of their hands. That's what I would do. Yeah, it's going to be problematic. Yeah, it's probably going to make them feel like they're outside. The bottom line is, if you actually care about what this is doing to them, then you should. But it's your decision, right? And nobody should be criticizing. It's a very difficult time, but I think very strongly about that. But under House Bill 186, social media companies would be banned from allowing people in Texas under age 18 to create accounts, banned from allowing you to do that. That never feels right. The government should not be dictating what you are or not allowed to do in your time with your phone. It's insane. But it's all being rationalized, right? Because we got to save the children every time. The platforms would also have to implement measures to verify the age of users. And there's another shoe that's dropping. Do you think they don't know what age you are? I'll read what they said down here, and they nailed it. Are we really going to pretend that they don't literally know what you're thinking right now? Kind of joking. What you ate 3 seconds ago? They know, guys. The amount of information is absolutely mind-blowing. But yeah, we need you to verify. This is about I think, getting more information, because there will be ways that you will get some that you didn't have, but also about just compliance. Normalizing this idea that you have to check with your authority before you can do basically anything. Now, State Representative Aaron Zwelder expressed concern the bill would allow social media companies to collect even more data. Says, I don't know how they can collect more data on us than they already do. They know when you're happy, they know when you're sad, they know when you're hungry, they know when you break up with your boyfriend, they know everything about you. They know when you plug your phone in at night. They know who else's phones are nearby when you plug in your phone at night. They know more about you than you know about yourself. And frankly, I agree with that. But somehow they can't deduce your age, right? State Representative Gene Wu said that he fears it would lead to people pulling back on political speech. That's also possible. The bill would also allow parents to request social media companies shut down their children's existing social media accounts. Now, there's an interesting conversation around that. That's the only part that, like, parents have that right. Now, they shouldn't be requesting the social media company do anything. They should just deal with that with their children, whether that's the phone, whether that's the account. And look, there's a whole dynamic there for parents to decide for themselves. That's why this should be nobody else's concern other than the child and the parent, and that's it. But it says the social media companies, if they do not comply, and see, this is where this becomes important, the bill empowers Texas Attorney General's office to take action against the platforms. The violations are considered deceptive trade practices under Texas law. Now, how long until that gets abused? How long until somebody pretends that they didn't do that and gets the company, rather, let's just say something relates to an unpopular conversation that they want to suppress, and suddenly start acting like there's a child being abused. And it's easy to see how this can be used to shut down certain conversations. While some critics argue that the bill infringes upon free speech and parental rights, Patterson said it is necessary to protect children from what he called harmful addictive behaviors. And that's the parent's decision and action. All of that is what you guys have been cultivating for, when did social media come around? Decades. And now you suddenly care when there's an interest in you doing so. The bill now goes over to the Senate for consideration, which again, probably won't pass, but who knows what's going on these days. Now, the whole point around this, as we go into a section about the influence of Israel, is to recognize that this is everywhere right now. And this is not like some secondary conversation, guys. They're literally telling you that they are going to censor you because you say things about Israel. They're going to deport people if they say things about Israel. Ozturk is still currently in prison because she wrote an op-ed about Israel's genocide. That's literally it. And no one seems to care about that, which is probably why the Garcia conversation, as much as it is still just as valid to discuss because you can prove they're lying, was one that got shoved to the focal point because they can at least pretend or even show you examples of his past that make him seem like a bad guy. And the whole point is nobody should be here discussing about whether this person's a bad person or not in regard to whether he was given due process, because the idea is that that's where you could prove the actual allegations and crimes, not lurch into some decade-old conversation because, well, he's clearly not father of the year. That's gross. Even if he's the worst person on the planet, that is you being emotionally manipulated because you probably already don't care, or because you're on the fence and they want you to look a different direction. Everything like this comes down to the idea that they're trying to control your speech for very clear political ends, whether it's about Israel, foreign policy. In this case, my point is they're making it obvious that you're not allowed to criticize Israel. And here we have another example on top of the recent bill about anti-Semitism awareness, and it's left and right. It's been going on for decades. Congress to ban boycotting of Israel. It's called the IGO Anti-Boycott Act. Now, Noctis Draven says, and he's a combat veteran, I believe he was, still is a Republican, I believe. One of the ones I think is now calling out what they've been doing in the administration. It sounds like something from a dystopian horror movie, he says, but it's not. Our government is really trying to force us to support Israel. With any other product, any other country, with any other people, we have the right and the choice to say no, but with Israel, they force us. I can't believe there are still people who will argue that we are not compromised. I agree. Now, this is just a graphic, but I believe it was, it's HR 867. Look it up. It's very prominent right now. House will vote on Monday to the IGO Anti-Boycott Act, sponsored by Representative Mike Lauer. Fines of up to $1 million, prison sentences up to 20 years for Americans participating in boycotts of Israel or its settlements if the boycotts are endorsed by international bodies like the UN or the EU. That's the addition. Before they already got all sorts of weird things unconstitutional every way you look at it that argue you're not allowed to boycott, anti-BDS. This is another level because they see what's happening in the world where now you're getting the UN discussions and larger groups of government that are saying we need to stop with that genocide. And if we start saying, I agree, or I signed that, or I'm going to join your boycott, now you can be fined $1 million. Welcome to the United States. Thomas Massie, at the very least, and interestingly enough, even Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, my personal opinion, this is her being an opportunist, which I think they all are. I question every single one of them, is simply recognizing that this is not even popular with, I would say in particular with the Republicans, which is interesting, right? Because it's directly about a free speech conversation. On the left, they may be more so calling out the Israel genocide, but are much more, and this is the left-right team sport politics sides, much more okay with censoring you based on certain opinions, right? So either way, it's interesting to see that they all recognize that nobody really wants this. So you even have people like her who I think are just trying to win certain points by playing this side of it, even though they all probably all will agree, because even Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest are supportive of Israel when it really matters. But Thomas Massie said, I agree that, she said, I will be voting no. It's my job to defend America's rights, when it's advantageous for you, clearly, to buy or boycott whomever they choose. But what I don't understand, she says, is why we are all voting on a bill on behalf of other countries than not the president's executive orders that are for our country. Now, see, this is so lame. They're such children. They're cowards, in my opinion. Are we really going to pretend like he hasn't signed an endless amount of executive orders that are in the same conversation? Executive orders about things that are absolutely for Israel's interest or things that are wildly anti-American? Or the fact that we know, executive orders apply only to the executive branch. Look it up. But yet we use them to make things happen around the world, or they try to. This is just her, I think, very clearly saying, I still love them, and this is our administration, Republicans are the best, but this is bad, to win support, my opinion. Thomas Massie just says, I agree, I'll be voting no on this bill as well. So let's briefly make sure we understand how clear this is. Now, these are all brand new examples. I could do a show every single day with new examples every day, showing you the same thing that people seem to not want to care about. But I'm of the mind that most Americans are uncomfortably aware of this, excuse me. This is something we've already played for you from this. I think Max aired this before in regard to a leaked conversation he got from the CEO of AIPAC. He says more confirmation of what AIPAC's director said in audio that he obtained from a private session. Mike Waltz, which tomorrow we're going to get more into the overlap of Iran, Mike Waltz, where that's going, Yemen, and so on, and the interesting overlap of Marco Rubio, which, by the way, somebody who remember when that first started? And the point was, we were like, oh my God, here they're pointing at Rubio for Trump's administration. Most of the conservative conversation were like, never going to happen. Oh, he's such a rhino. It'll never happen. And then he gets it. He's the best guy in the world. Now he's got two positions, right? Now he's like the new Kissinger, the point, right? Both those positions. This guy is a very clear Zionist and is not on your side and apparently hates Trump until suddenly we're all on the same side. It's insane how obvious all of this is, that at the very least, these people are not actually what they're presenting. But I think that's interesting. Tomorrow we'll go more into the overlap of the signal point. I think there's one more tweet in this little section here that is important around that, showing you yet again that Waltz in particular is basically an Israel plant. This is not hard to see today. It doesn't mean you hate Jews. It's insane that we have to walk through all of this. It's about the Israeli government infiltrating foreign powers. And of course, to make the point broad, as I was just pointing out in someone's comment, that does not mean in any way to suggest all or nothing, that Jews are all good and Zionists are all bad. The point is, it clearly overlaps with Jewish supremacy. B'Tselem will tell you that, an Israeli human rights group. But it's not just about Jewish people, seeing as how there are Jews all around the world. I'm beginning to see a massive momentum happening here, calling out the lie that is Zionism, the lie that Israel represents all Jews. It's not the truth. It's a political Zionist organization. But the bottom line here is to show you that this is such an obvious infiltration that it needs to be called out, whether it's China or Russia or anybody else. So my point was, we're going to get into more of that tomorrow that I think is important to foreign policy. For today, it's just about the infiltration. Now, if you can play this clip, it's about a minute and a half. The point is, he's just simply, as he says, Mike Waltz was groomed by the Israeli lobby to serve as an asset in the GOP, in a GOP White House. Now he'll serve Israel at the UN because now he'll be the ambassador. Ali Abunimah from the Electronic Intifada says the firing of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz appears to be part of the battle between the ultra pro-Israel and the ultra pro-Israel, you gotta love that, of the Donald Trump administration. Now, I like the way he said that because my opinion is that none of them are against the idea of what Israel wants here in regard to Iran, but there's different tacks about where they think they should be going. And I think one of them is that they'll just do it because that's what Israel wants now. Zionist versus those that are like, come on, we agree, but we can't look this obvious, right? That's my opinion. Either way, very important to recognize how transparent this is and how much you can prove. Dropsite News put this article out. On the day he was fired as National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz used an Israeli app to archive signal messages. Because the point is, guys, that it's now been clearly shown that Mike Waltz essentially was archiving their conversations for Israel. We'll go into this more tomorrow. But I mean, just think about how insanely obvious all of this is. This whole signal gate thing seems to be more than it appears. And look, if we can't recognize by now the outright infiltration of not just cybersecurity, but this country by a foreign government, it's so, I mean, what you're seeing is inside the core of the White House, every day you're finding new examples of what they're doing is for the interest of Israel, including giving them insight into top secret conversations or whatever level it is inside White House dialogue about things that are about national security. And that this is more likely to me why he might be shuffled aside, because he just is too obvious. Not that they care, in my opinion. Here's John Kirikow, former CIA, or at least former in quotes as always, but here's what he says. And he has been very prolific about speaking out about what this is about Israel, about the CIA. So just keep in mind, in my opinion, there's rarely former any intelligence, but he speaks about Merav Sirin, who we've already discussed. I showed you the clip from Jeff Sachs and Judge Napolitano, which is discussing how outrageous this is. But here's another example, just so we know this is not a new conversation. This is insane. And this is an Israeli entity that is now an Israeli citizen, a part of the Israeli Ministry of Defense that was now inside the national security dynamic of the Trump administration. But yeah, let's pretend like we're totally making these things up, right? We're all anti-Jewish or whatever they want to throw in your face while we can see what's happening.
News today revealed that his new director for Israel and Iran is Merev Karen, who was previously an employee at the Israeli Ministry of Defense. How does somebody like that get a security clearance? That seems highly unusual.
It's highly unusual. It's not unique to Donald Trump, although it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable no matter who the president is. But Bill Clinton did the same thing, where he named a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen to be ambassador to Israel, for heaven's sake. I honestly don't know how something like this happens unless either the FBI is ignored or the FBI is told to ignore the fact that this person may have dual loyalties. I think it's very, very dangerous because the Israelis are rated as critical threat for counterintelligence in the U.S. intelligence community. They're rated at the same level as the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and the Cubans. And so I wouldn't want anybody with ties to Israel anywhere near the National Security Council, let alone to be one of the deputy directors of the National Security Council. I don't know how this happens. I don't know why this person isn't already being investigated for espionage or for...
Yes, we do. And I would argue so does he. Right. But I think there's a line to how far he can go. That's my opinion.
Some sort of violation of the Espionage Act. But this is the situation we find ourselves in. And I think people get away with it because there's no public outrage. To me, this is huge news. I saw this at Dropsite as well. Where I didn't see it was in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Wall Street Journal. And that's, I think, part of the problem.
Yep. Now, I include the Dropsite News article where you can read that. Here is Elon Pape discussing the same conversation. And it is about the infiltration. I mean, like the direct purchasing of politicians in this country, which, by the way, is what Israel brags about. Netanyahu has himself 2 different leaked videos where he brags about how he controlled the U.S. government. But we're all crazy.
New book coming out, which is called Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic. And I show how from 1900, both in America and in Britain, you target politicians wherever they are. At the beginning of their career, you commit them to Zionism and later to Israel. And at first, of course, they were not powerful enough to influence enough people. But, you know, the more they grew in numbers, they were able to influence more. So when people say, why does Biden so automatically supports Israel? The lobby doesn't need to ring Biden and say to him, you better support Israel.
He knows the rules of the game.
He knows the rules. He knows what happened to anyone who even dared to slightly, like Obama or Carter, slightly challenged left? What happened to them? You read Obama's memoirs, you can see how he said, I suddenly understood. Any word I'm saying on Israel can bring down Congress. So I had to be very, very careful. And actually what he says, he admits, I could not be loyal to my basic instinct, which was to be pro-Palestinians. I couldn't, because I wouldn't be a president.
God. I mean, think about how wild it is that we can have these kind of things come out in their books, or, of course they could be lying, always possible, but it's consistent. Look at them. It's very regular. I mean, Kirk himself has all sorts of stories about what they do in the infiltration. This one being about the agents in the United States, which are always there, and we don't acknowledge it. Mossad. I mean, it's right on the surface. Now, Obama could very likely be doing that to sort of win himself some points afterward for some future dynamic. The bottom line is that we know these things, that he's openly telling you that if we don't, they'll bring down Congress, or at least that's his impression. But we can't have an honest conversation. Like, I don't mean that we can. I think the majority of the world is like all going, yeah, we all see it. But the vehicle, which is the mainstream media apparatus, that includes the mainstream alternative media, just doesn't care, lies about it, whether they know it or don't know it, or they're being used or paid to ignore. There's this major circulating thing that we all pretend is the main dynamic that doesn't care. It won't ever talk about it unless it becomes important to use to talk something else down. Like the release valve, or to show you the problems because they're going to use your awareness of it to roll in the new problem. These are the only times we see it. And it's, again, look for yourself. The history is obvious. Now, I could be wrong about what's happening next, but the precedent's there, and we see it all building. The same thing, guys. We know this. It's already been there for you. Now, here's a clip from, this was on Piers Morgan. And John says, why do Mossad and Israel have disproportionate influence in the U.S. national security and domestic politics? Why are they considered off limits for the CIA? Here's his conversation. Scott Horton is with him. Of course, you got Alan Dershowitz, who's just like the go-to defender of anything Israel genocide. And here's the conversation.
The host of CIA Declassified on UNI FYD TV. You said this: we saw what the Israelis were getting away with in these prisons that they had in the West Bank and in Gaza. Nobody raised any objection at all. So we thought, well, if the Israelis can do it, we can do it. The president said we could, and the Justice Department said we could, and so we did. You've also separately described Mossad, saying that it has a negative, disproportionate and widespread influence on the U.S. national security state. So you're clearly not a fan of the Mossad. Why?
Now, before he answers, think of what we just talked about. Like, he's literally being in real time proven to be correct with what we just talked about. That's the infiltration of the national security dynamic.
I remember when I first joined the CIA, and this is going back 35 years, there was a declared Mossad officer in the Israeli embassy and a declared Shin Bet officer, and the FBI was able to identify 187 additional Israeli intelligence officers at work in the United States clandestinely. I would say, why? Why would they steal secrets when we give them 99% of everything that we already have?
But doesn't the United States steal secrets from Israel too? Of course they do.
No. Actually,
think how hilarious that is. His best defense is you do it too. Well, doesn't that seem familiar to every conversation we have? Just because, like, the point is, then you're the same. The bottom line, though, is that all you did is admit that Israel's got almost 200 spies circulating that we know about that are undeclared and stealing. And he's like, yes, he basically just admitted that, but you do it too, which I probably wouldn't. That's probably the case. But just think about that. That means your government is allowing a foreign intelligence apparatus to be operating of its own accord on the ground against you. We see that more than ever today with what's going on post October 7th.
No, the Israelis were off limits to us at the CIA. We were not permitted to conduct that for.
Here, let me play it again so you can hear the timing of his response there.
But doesn't the United States steal secrets from Israel too? Of course they do.
No, actually, no. The Israelis were off limits to us at the CIA. We were not permitted to conduct
that. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 second.
Well, Jeff Stein, the great intelligence beat reporter.
Great logical response there, bud. I don't believe you. Well, okay. He's the, what's funny is that obviously the case is he's from the CIA. He could be lying, but Alan Dershowitz's response is based, it's just, anything I'm not supposed, that's not true, even though he doesn't have any evidence to back it up and the other guy does. That's an emotional response. That's what he's there for.
from Newsweek would report every year on an intelligence report that the FBI would put out about the worst counterintelligence threats in the United States. And it was Russia, China, and Israel. Eventually, what happened was it caused such a scandal after time of this coming out that Dianne Feinstein ended up changing the rules so that they didn't have to issue the report anymore, so that Jeff Stein wouldn't be able to report on it anymore. But they were alleged by the FBI Counterintelligence Division to be the most damaging spies in America, only after our supposed adversaries, Russia and China.
Now, notice, by the way, how both the two Israeli guests or Israel side guests have the yellow pin on. Now, you remember what that's for, right? That's for the hostages, the detainees. Well, the ridiculousness of still wearing that is how many times we've now proven, even from Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich's own mouth, that they have sabotaged the deal so they could maintain this war. Now, if you're out there going, that's not true, then you're literally not paying attention. They're openly telling you now if you just listen to them, which is pretty much the way it's been the entire time. But they've admitted it more times than more. You can go back to the very beginning, the 9th and the 10th. They had 2 different offers for full exchange to end the war. Israel said no because they wanted to keep the war and made it clear that Hamas was the focus. The hostages were secondary. And now they just flipped it on its ear and pretend the opposite. Every time. Like the stage 2 of the last ceasefire was supposed to release all the hostages, and that was the end of it, and they stopped it there and said, no, they need to give us back some of the hostages that they'd otherwise get if they just went through with what they already agreed with. It's insane. But they do it because they're supposed to bring them home and end the war. Nope, because Israel said 47 times that even if we get them all back, we have to go after Hamas. They know they're lying, guys. So just look at them and understand that they're dishonest people. They're not stupid. They know that they're lying to you. It has to be heard. Now, the infiltration is everywhere. Now, this show was about a lot of things, but one of the major points was about the Israeli cybersecurity infiltration. They're really showing you this long-term ploy of getting infiltrated to, infiltrating foreign governments, religion, obviously, and cybersecurity. I had a great interview with David Icke, Zionist infiltration of Judaism. He talks about the Sabbatean kind of origin point to a lot of this, which is the same conversation. Here's another clip from John himself saying the Jeffrey Epstein operation is a classic example of a foreign government-run blackmail scheme. Another thing that we all know because Acosta and plenty of others have outright stated it, but we still act like it's undefined and we're not sure. It's always so infuriating. There is no reason to protect these files anymore, he says. Of course, because where's the files for Epstein, client list, Bondi, Cash, Bongino, and all the rest? So it's all coming. Let's talk about Tesla people. He says, why is the Epstein file classified in the first place? Why is the U.S. government protecting this operation? Was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad access agent? He said, I discussed this and more with, this is Julian Dory in the latest episode of his podcast.
About literally no reason to be classified. Yeah. Why would we be protecting a guy like him? Why? He's a convicted first of all, and probably way worse than just that.
Yes.
I think the evidence is pretty strong that he was way worse than that.
It's bad guy.
I say all the time, and I'm going to repeat it here. I think the reason why even in death he's being protected is I believe...
Assuming that's the case. I mean, that has to be pointed out. I mean, who knows at this point? The whole story. I mean, if you want to laugh, I hate to even say it like that, but it really circles around whether he was the only one involved in that story. So you could pretty much laugh at this point, how dumb it all was. To be honest, pretty much like the Trump assassination conversation, very clearly something awry, right? But the idea that he's in a place designed to stop even committing suicide, the cameras all stop working, everyone goes on a break. I mean, it's insanely stupid. It might as well be a cartoon. And that he supposedly hung himself with sheets designed to not be able to do that from a short bed. It's insane. I mean, at the very least, somebody did it to him, but it's so crazy that we just keep going along with the same old narratives. Even though literally everybody, I mean, unless you are a simpleton or in kindergarten, then you know that just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Now, that's not to say we know for certain what actually happened, but it's like the 9/11 story or going back to the Warren Report, for crying out loud. Even back then, you understand the JFK report, nobody bought it, guys. Most Americans were like, that's not the case. They know this and it never changes. We all know they're lying to us. We all keep pointing it out and they just keep going forward because it seems no one has the ability or the interest to truly stop them. And I don't mean violence, but I find that insane.
Pretty strongly that he was a Mossad access agent.
As do I.
It all points to that.
So why are we protecting him?
look at why the Mossad might be interested in somebody like him. Let's say you are the leader of the Mossad and you want really tightly held, closely protected information from senior American leaders, political leaders, business leaders. You can't recruit those people. You're not going to recruit Bill Clinton. You're not going to recruit Bill Gates or any of the other Prince Andrew. You're not going to recruit those people. So you do the next best thing. You recruit somebody who has ready access to them.
That's right.
And then on top of that, you give him an unlimited amount of money where he's got this private island in the Caribbean and a private jet where he can fly his friends down there. You wire the house for audio and video, so nothing is overlooked. And you ply them with alcohol and underage girls, and you've got them. You've got them. So you can either do it the easy way or you can do it the hard way. You say to them, look, you just had a 16-year-old girl, and so you're going to tell me what I want to know. Or
it's also worth pointing out, and this is not intended to give anybody some kind of a pass, that there could be dynamics where somebody is not willing or not interested in doing the gross thing they need to catch you doing. And so they can trick you with a woman that is underage, but is made to look that she's not, or so on. Or, who knows how they can make these, or drug you and have you wake up in a room full of things. Like, there's so many ways that they could get you there so they could abuse the situation, even if you may actually not be potentially blackmailable, or however the term would be used. I just think it's worth considering that it's not always just that everyone is always disgusting. I feel like people are entrapped in the same ways, because let's be clear, this is a broad category that, it's not a hard sell to convince me that everybody in politics is bad, but nonetheless, it's 100%, if anything, is rarely the case. So just think about the other ways this could be done.
They know what the game is. They know what they've done. Otherwise, we wouldn't have people coming out and saying, well, I kept my underwear on. Remember that? I think that that's what this was. I think that this is, because we all know that the Israelis spy on us. I mean, they're worse than the KGB or whatever the KGB calls.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
For the intelligence community in the United States, Israel is ranked as critical threat for counterintelligence. They are prolific spies.
Think about how obvious that is. They know that's their own assessment. And yet here we are. Like we are living through a coup in this country. It's not a light statement to make. I don't know why we can't acknowledge this, whether it's like a Zionist coup, a technocratic coup, a globalist coup, or all three combined, because that's really how I see it personally. I think these are the same agenda, and it's all coming to fruition right now. I don't know why we can't have the courage to call this out, like at a core level. Like, where are the people that are like in the core supporting base of these larger people? I know you exist. I see you out there. But I know there are enough people out there that are choosing to pull their punches that allow this to continue.
So it just makes perfect sense to me that this would be an Axis operation.
Pretty interesting. Now, just want to include, of course, and I think it's a good time to replay this in case you haven't heard it in a while. This long thread I have, all these different videos of Donald Trump essentially saying something similar, except the last two, which are about the free speech overlap, the guns and the flag point, but the same conversation, because it's all about censorship of speech. But the first, 8, 9, 10 videos are Trump literally telling you that he's going to censor you for Israel in slightly different ways. But the most important is where he literally says on a radio show that Israel used to control Congress and that it should, rightly so. Think about that with what's happening right now. Hold on. Where was that? I must have doubled over it. Hold on. When I'm downloading these, I put numbers on them so I can tell you while I'm looking for this. I download them in order, so I keep them in numbers, and I think sometimes I use the same number twice and like delete the one I had before it, and then I don't realize that. That's what I'm pretty sure just happened. There it is.
The biggest change I've seen in Congress is Israel literally owned Congress. You understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. And I think you know exactly what I'm saying. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully, over Congress.
Very clear. And again, I've said this every time. We've gone over the full clip. We've shown it many times. It's not out of context. But if you're willing to just disregard it as it must not be real before you even check for yourself, then you've already made your mind up. The facts don't matter. Here's Jimmy Dore sharing something of Jeffrey Sachs. Now, by the way, Derek shared a clip today just to remind you of this, because I made this point back when he was first kind of getting a lot of attention around points around Israel. He's very clearly like a globalist. He made a statement recently about wanting that global government. That's the solution. Now, that who knows if that's because this is all lull you into support for that, or maybe he thinks that is the solution and doesn't realize it's the wrong path. Consider that. It very much matters. Doesn't change the fact that what he's saying here is true. And Jimmy says, of course, Israel's behind the current push to get the U.S. into war. Let me see what this is. Hold on. It's interesting. Huh. That's weird how he's got the link in there, but it's that's strange. Anyway, who knows what's going on with Twitter these days? And it says, of course, Israel's behind the current push to get U.S. in war with Iran. Jeffrey Sachs explains, Israel runs the U.S. government, runs the White House. We need to know this by now, guys. These are insiders that are calling it out. Let's call it out.
Israel runs the U.S. government, runs the White House. They're run by Israel. They're serving Israel. They're doing this for Israel. And that means that the United States is in war in places it shouldn't be in. No, we should not be in war in Yemen, for heaven's sake. We shouldn't be in war in Syria, in Libya, in Lebanon. We're in war in all of these places. We have a group, Amateur Hour, in the White House deciding where to bomb, but they're doing it for Israel's behest, not for American interest or American security. Not only is it Amateur Hour, not only is it Israel Hour nonstop, but it's as if we have essentially one-person rule.
Yep. And in addition to that I'm going to go into this more tomorrow, but I wanted to make sure you didn't miss it. The follow the account, actually, Freedom Flotilla Coalition. They follow me because I was doing some reporting on it back when it was basically nobody talking about it other than the ones that tend to. I'm glad it's getting more attention now. They've been doing this for a very long time. Actually, I bet you I can pull this up real quick. I'll include this too. Yeah, there it is. This is when I first caught attention to this. Now, this is Joe Meters. He is a USS Liberty veteran. He was on the USS Liberty when it was attacked, and he's been speaking out ever since, telling you what actually happened, telling you what we all actually know, that Israel attacked it and the U.S. government covered it up. Anybody you talk to who was there will tell you that. And yeah, it's just every day, all the lies, insane. He was on a Freedom Flotilla that was trying to bring help to Gaza, and they attacked the ship while he was on it. One before that, they attacked it and killed people. Now, what we're going to show you today is that they bombed another one with a drone strike recently, full of innocent people in international waters. This is so wild. This is terrorism. There's literally no legal justification for anything they seem to be doing, let alone something like this. But I'll include this for you, where Joe's just saying, hey, basically the video was, that's the main part. He was on the Freedom Flotilla that they took over. They seized it. They arrested him. He's a U.S. citizen. They held him in jail for a long time. The U.S. government never said a word, never spoke up about it. Israel arrested a U.S. veteran and put him in prison, and they didn't even care. This was 6 years ago. You know what administration that was, guys. Let's be honest about what's happening. And it's the same government go. It doesn't matter what left or right position was there. I think they would have done the same thing. But important to understand. He was trying to tell you that. Now, that we covered it, the point is that they've continued to do this ever since. Here, Freedom Flotilla Coalition, breaking at basically just after midnight Maltese time, a Freedom Flotilla ship was subjected to a drone attack full of innocent people, by the way. The front of the vessel was targeted twice, resulting in a fire and a breach of the hull. The ship is currently located in international waters near Malta. An SOS distress signal was sent. Now, as I understand it, we'll get into more. I believe everybody has been safely removed, that they were trying to get someone to help them. The bottom line is, it says everyone aboard is okay, but at risk. It's nightfall. They were still on the ship. And ultimately, they were trying to get themselves taken to where I thought I had the map on there. I guess not. I'll go over it more tomorrow. Taken to Italy, essentially. The simple point about this is that it happened, that they're bombing international water ships. Now, realize with what's going on with Yemen, Like if they're going to start, look, this is the same thing that happens every time. If you're going to make a case about how Yemen is are pirates, the Houthis are bombing them, even though what they've continued to do is stop every time there's a ceasefire, only attack ships that are illegally trying to bring things to Israel per the international community, and never killed anybody, not even any injuries as far as I can tell, and have never stolen anything. And then come over here and bomb this ship and act like either we're doing it because they're doing it, which, okay, then they're both crimes then, right? Because you told us it's a crime, but it won't happen like that. Or they're just trying to get away with it because they think that that's an excuse should they need to use it. War crimes. Obviously, everywhere you look, guys, that's what they're doing. Now, Propaganda & Co. highlights that according to Israeli media, Israel has clearly openly taken credit for it, which doesn't surprise me, seeing as how they're pushing boundaries everywhere. But the Israeli government admits to attacking the ship. And he simply says, this is going to be a massive story, but I didn't see a lot of coverage, to be honest. Tried to murder 30 humanitarians at sea. And the whole point is, guys, bringing food and aid to starving people in Gaza. That's the only point. And here is a disgusting example of a Zionist who said, over 2,000 kilometers from Israel off the coast of Malta, Israel, according to foreign publications, attacked with drones a ship that was planning to go to Gaza to break the blockade. You know, aid, food. Like with the Mavi Marmara flotilla at the time. Now, instead of reaching Gaza, it is sinking on its way to the depths. Excellent. How could I am proud to see this, he says. That's what this Zionist Israeli said out loud. See, it's the same as people going, yay, deport those disgusting migrants, even though that's a direct violation of the Constitution, despite your ignorance around the topic. You are cheering on your own demise and you don't even recognize it. Well, in this case, these are people that are okay with this because they're monsters. The reality is that's a war crime. Nothing will happen for the reasons we just went over. Here, of course, is one of the many examples of starving children in Gaza right now. Starving. Everyone in that country has been over 60 days with zero, not a single thing. 500 trucks a day before this was what they got to maintain their food insecurity. And that's all because of the refusal of Israel to allow them to return to their land. That's what this comes down to. UNRWA was created to basically keep track of the right of return. And then because they maintained this over the last 77 years, well, they became a refugee agency in regard to keeping track and keeping them fed, because the whole thing is in hopes that they were going to be able to return legally, which Israel agreed to, and it's never allowed. Now, of course, the overarching point is that they've been discussing getting you moved, or getting Gazans, Palestinians moved somewhere else. And what is their demand? You have to give up your right of return. Oh, you mean the thing that you keep telling us doesn't exist? See, they know what's going on, and they're hoping that people's hatred, their blind racism, or their ignorance will allow this to continue. That is what they're stopping. Food reaching children like her. And you can see the image of her before. Right there. And in case you didn't see it, I said every day, these people show you who they are. If you just look. Hashtag Zionism is not Judaism. Hashtag Gaza genocide. Here's what she said. And we pointed this one out before. She's the one that said, kill the children. There's no innocent children. She's the one that's laughed about. I mean, she is a grotesque example of a grotesque administration. And she says the breaking of the siege was, in my opinion, a terrible decision, which, by the way, it didn't even actually break. Without hunger and thirst, is what she says. Among the Gazan population, we won't be able to recruit collaborators. We won't be able to bribe people with food, drinks, or medication. Just unabashedly saying what is undeniably a crime. And that's where you end up getting people that are their children are dying at their feet and go, fine, I'll be a spy for you if my child doesn't die. Or, this is how they abuse it. That's how sanctions work for the U.S. government. They drive people to a state of desperation to where, we know what you're doing. We just don't care. Just make it stop. That's who these people are. And she's up there proudly saying this to a group of people that largely agree with her. It's not my opinion. It's disgusting. So I hope that in general can give you an understanding of where we are. Maybe you haven't even seen any of this, but it's important to understand how all of this interconnects. Now, on to the more alarming conversation of deportations, of the U.S. government seemingly suggesting and voting to deport Americans and voting down amendments that suggest they shouldn't be able to, even though we know that's the reality. The deportations around Garcia or the Barber or any number of examples that we are very clear about. If you understand the facts and aren't being blinded by partisan media, it's clear what's happening right now. These are unconstitutional acts. There are some judges, whether politically motivated or not, that are trying to stop it and adhere to the Constitution, and then they're being attacked for it. That's not to say there's no political motivation. We know that there is. You can read the Constitution. You're not stupid. Look at it for yourself. It's obvious what's happening. Now, whether or not, let's just say Abrego Garcia, since we'll start with that, whether or not he is a wife beater, whether or not he was a human trafficker, which, by the way, neither of those things are definitive. And in particular, the trafficking point we'll go over today, which is now circulating again. There's no charge. There was no crime. He was released and nothing happened. But the argument is, well, he almost got arrested for it. That doesn't mean anything. Or the idea that his wife put something about, what's the term for it? But, accused him of, let's just even say she came out and said he beat me. What does that have to do with whether or not he is a member of MS-13 or whether or not they ultimately prove that in court, which none of which happened, which has been the only point. The only point anybody honest is making about this is about whether or not anything they're claiming could have been proved if they had the evidence in the process to deport him. That's it. That's not what happened before. In 2019, they doesn't somehow not get the process today. And yes, even illegal aliens do have rights according to the Supreme Court, according to the Constitution. There's Napolitano, Justice Scalia. Over and over, you can see the evidence if you just, and by the way, I'll include, like I had before, this right here, which is the link from Grok. In case that somehow means more to you, that this random AI that Elon created somehow tells you what we know, which is that, yes, illegal aliens have the right to due process in the Constitution, affirmed by, one is Reno versus Flores. This one is how do you say that again? Zadvidas versus Davis, all of which affirm in the Supreme Court that, yes, the obvious, which we already know, is that they do have rights. Now, going back to this, I'm going to include these ones. The unprecedented gaslighting lies around Abrego Garcia. And that's simply about the evidence that we have and what they're claiming it shows. That's not to say he's a good guy. Frankly, I think anybody knows ultimately the evidence they're showing is very flimsy at this point. I mean, I know people, you could show examples of people around, like I know people in my growing up, that have had domestic dispute. God, what are the terms they use for that? Where somebody gets called because they're arguing or they're fighting each other. The point is that doesn't mean they're good or bad. The point is that we don't know interpersonal dynamics. Whether or not they hate each other, whether or not he's a wife beater is something you should consider in the context of whether or not they should have a counselor, whether she be arrested for wife beating. It has nothing to do with the main conversation, which is the point. It's about trying to get you off onto some emotional discussion about, well, and again, the earliest point about he's not the father of the year, the only reason that makes sense is because they don't have evidence. They need you to be outraged about something else. It's very simple. Now I'll go through it all again because the argument is somehow that we're all trying to, make this guy a pillar of the community. I don't see anybody doing that. Even the ridiculous people on the partisan left who are just as blinded by all this are not out there trying to make him out to be some hero. They're making the same argument that ultimately this is a violation of his rights. And the best they can do is go dumb Democrats, which is the exact same thing the left did when they were in this position. It's not unique. But if you care about the right, the Constitution, for example, the fact that Trump literally got caught not claiming that he actually had the letter M and S and 1 and 3 on his knuckles, which he did not, is absolutely insane to me that doesn't change the conversation. That he's out there stressing we know this because of those, and that's not true. So what else does he think he knows that he does not? What else is he lying about if that's the way it's going? It should be earth-shattering to you that kind of thing can happen. Now, I think, let's see. If I still have it right here, I might just play a part of that because I think it's important to set that tone. Yeah, here it is.
He wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute.
Which is the truth. He has tattoos that they're interpreting that way, which you look for yourself. I don't. You could pretend that might mean that. It's a stretch, even if you think those things stand for what they said they did. He does not have the actual letters on his hand.
Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was photoshopped. So let me
That was photoshopped, Terry. You can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime.
See, and he gets like this to me shows you that Trump doesn't know this. I think he's being played, even though he will probably go along with certain things anyway. I mean, think about how angry he must have been when he gets out of this thing. He looked like a fool. And even his supporters know that. That's embarrassing. And because he's like has this righteous indignation, like, Terry, God, this is why you guys are bad at your jobs. And he's wrong. And yes, I also agree that they are bad at their jobs and they are propagandists and they do all lie at the time. But in this case, Trump is wrong. Simple as that.
Doing the interview, I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay.
So he picked him because he never heard of him. Right. That's just his childish, you are bad because you're making me feel stupid.
But I picked you, Terry, but you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry.
Won't let
You
it go.
want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshop? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert
Can
on
be
them.
interpreted.
I want to turn to Ukraine,
No,
sir.
Terry,
I want to get to
Terry,
Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted.
Not interpreted. There is literally no misunderstanding that. So just in case we're still playing this game where either he somehow does have those on his knuckles, that's actually still being stated, which blows my mind, or that you misinterpret what Trump was even trying to say, or even his own administration tried to walk it back and try to make it sound like he didn't really say that. It's just embarrassing, guys, because the reality is one of two things in my mind. Either he was played and doesn't know he's wrong until now, when now he feels really stupid, or there's so many lies swirling around. Well, I guess three. Two would be so many lies swirling around, amongst like Stephen Miller and probably all, which is just a Zionist who is clearly driving part of this immigration bus, that he just ends up thinking those are the cases without even, because the point is these things are all over the place. He picked it up, doesn't even realize that's one of the lies and fakes it loudly. Or he was doing this on purpose. I just don't think Trump is willing to make himself look that stupid for an agenda. I think he has too much hubris for that. But I still find that to be absolutely wild. So we talked about that. And the DOJ memo allowing ICE to break the law, which is to kick in your door if they think there's an immigrant in your house, despite the fact that even we have numerous examples of U.S. citizens being arrested or innocent people with no criminal record or not and being here legally who are currently in El Salvador. But they'll tell you, we know they're illegal. Oh, well, how do you know that? That's where due process comes in. Because without that, despite all the claims of how long it will take, they can literally accuse anybody of being what they want and remove them, like we already have seen. The idea that a child could understand that logic. That is why the government, who's never supposed to be on your side, as the people of America, your job is to hold them to account, not to blindly support one side of the agenda. The reality is that if you don't hold them to make them prove what they're saying in any context, then they'll take advantage. See, this all comes down to certain people that have decided that he or their side is not the ones that will do it. And you're the children in the room, sadly enough. But as Nathan here, not familiar with, editor of whatever that is, Current Affairs, he says, let's make this clear. And this is New York Post, which is just, especially post October 7th, they really have shown you what they are. He bragged, he basically, they're putting a post on October 30th that says, Kilmar Abrego Garcia bragged he could kill his wife and get away with it. She claimed in a newly unearthed protective order. Okay. What does that have to do with anything? The only reason that makes sense is because you want to add to the idea that you think he is what the other evidence has already shown they can't prove. So the idea is that you're just trying to get people to ignore the fact that you don't prove these things because, well, if he did that, then he's probably just as bad. That's not a legal argument. You are being played, if you think that makes sense, by justifying the government just deciding to do what it wants to do, regardless of the Constitution, regardless of what it can prove. Take out the political dynamics and apply it to any other topic, and you damn well know this is wrong. But she said this about beating his wife, so that means we can ignore everything else. That's a child. And Nathan says the same thing I've been saying. Let's make this clear. The issue is not his character. The issue is that there was a court order barring his deportation to El Salvador. That's one of them. The administration ignored the order. That is what this case is about. It's not about whether he's a good person. It's about legal process, right? Because the first part is that he was legally, the Supreme Court already ruled he could not be sent to El Salvador. That's where they claim they made the mistake, which they now weirdly pretend they didn't say. The second part is if you were going to try to do anything like that, whether to El Salvador or anything else, yes, due process, Reno versus Flores, is paramount. They have to prove what they're saying, as I just said, because otherwise they could do whatever they want under the guise of going after any illegal immigrant and send Americans wherever they want or whoever else, or people who are here legally, they pretend are illegal immigrants, which has already happened. It's simple. See, when they say not the idea, it's being not about his character. right? What we're talking about in this dynamic is, I mean, look, do we really pretend like we can decipher somebody's character over the process of a few points on social media? You know how easy it is to misrepresent that? Look, based on what we're seeing, this guy seems like a lot of other people in this country. And yes, probably has his skeletons in his closet. Now, are we going to compare that to politicians who are now preaching to you about how bad this guy is? Do you realize how many people have stood up and told you this guy's a monster, even if he is, who are absolutely the most dangerous people on the planet, who are genociding, who are supporting despots and censoring you and everything else you could imagine, giving children shots that kill them. But we're going to make a stink about this guy's background because they want you to go after him for a foreign government. Or whatever. I don't even mean Israel right there. You're going to find out some stuff in a second about El Salvador that I think is exactly what I was sensing in the whole conversation. But are we really that simple that we can just pretend we now know his entire life because of a few things we're sharing on Twitter? Well, gee, I hope that doesn't happen because I damn well know a lot of you out there judging this person have worse skeletons in your closet. But as I said, the same. Exactly what I have been saying since this started. And you guys know, every day we talk about this, as well as the lack of due process. Those are the only points. Most of the conversation revolves around subjective info meant to make you ignore both of those things, shows you that they are aware of the problem here, guys. Now, of course, Pim jumps in and says, holy SHID, just does his job rising up the things that are like, this is the kind of journalism that's allowed into the White House press briefings, right? This kind of ridiculous sideshow act. This guy says, Fox News has obtained his second protective order. That's what they were referencing. Filed against the Maryland man, in quotes, because he's not from Maryland. He is. I mean, just the game where they play like, oh, no, he's not from Maryland. He's from El Salvador. Okay, well, then I'm from Puerto Rico, right? I mean, or even specifically, I shouldn't say that. I wasn't born there. My dad was. My point is, you could find people that moved here when they were kids, and you're going to now argue that they're never where they make their life. It's all politics. My point is, yes, he's clearly was here illegally. That's when he was given the withholding of removal from Trump's last administration, and then they move forward. Everything else is hearsay wrapped over that has not actually come to no charges, crime. The point is, going back to 2019 in the parking lot with Bull's hat on, that's all that happened. A corrupt cop who was later fired, who points to an anonymous source that no one's ever proven, that says he was MS-13, and thus claim has circulated through, now I found 3 different processes. Pointing back to that, saying that suggests, but not proven that he is this thing. That is carrying over to this very day. The bottom line is he was in Maryland and has been allowed to be there by the last Trump administration and has built a life there. He's going to school. He's working. He's kids. He's married a U.S. citizen, which means he's a U.S. citizen now. I guess those things don't matter, but Maryland man, in quotes, because they want you to hate this person. And it says, the protective order in 2020 that his wife filed, apparently, in which she accuses him of physical abuse, threatening her, and says she has a recording where he says, even if he kills her, nobody can do anything about it. Okay. See what I'm saying? Like, this is just me. This is embarrassing reporting from groups that are trying to lay a narrative for the government. Is that what journalism is supposed to be? What does this have to do with the major point? They want you to hate this person. That's all it's about. There are people right now, especially politicians, who are probably telling you that makes them the bad person, who have worse skeletons in their closet right now, even around beating their wives. It's just very, very sad. And he goes, holy SHIT. I don't care. Right now, the point is, if you want to, let's just say tomorrow, evidence came out that showed that this person was doing some horrific crime. Would that then make everything okay? I mean, only if you then realize that it's not about the actual policy. It's not about the Constitution. It's about whether you hate this person or not. If we understand the Constitution, if we understand the legal realities of this, then nothing else matters than whether or not they proved those things in regard to whether they deported him recently. Not about a crime that happened before. And look, if you want to point to a crime, if you had the evidence of that and say this is enough to get him deported, you would still have to present that to a judge to make the case to deport. That's the reality. The fact that we're just acting like it shouldn't be is a different conversation, guys. It's embarrassing that people like this are out there screaming things that have no bearing on the real point of the conversation. Now, this is interesting from New York Post as well. Moment alleged MS-13 gangbanger Kilmore Abrego, even they are now saying alleged, by the way, because everyone has taken a step back from that and now are just pointing at subjective side points because they don't have any evidence for it, was accused of human trafficking, they say. Revealed in a new body cam video. Now, this is being used to claim, see, he's a human trafficker. If you actually read the article, Even the New York Post is forced to tell you that literally nothing happened. Now, accused of something is not supposed to mean anything, right? If you were never charged with a crime, people accuse me of being all sorts of things. Does that mean forever I'm going to be listed as those things? Yeah, it's called logic, equal application of the logic, not because you're supposed to hate this guy. We go, yeah, well, that's enough. We'll ignore his constitutional rights because he was accused of something. Here's what New York Post wrote. Abrego Garcia was apparently going too fast, which is why he was stopped, the trooper explained. When officers put Abrego Garcia's name into the National Crime Information Center, a warning came up that showed he was suspected of being a gang member. And you know what that comes back to? 2019, same point we just made. And accused was the point. Never actually proven and charged with it because there was no evidence. It came back to the fact that he wore a bull's hat, was in the wrong place at the right time. That's it. And a corrupt cop that was fired right after this with a source that nobody's ever been able to prove. That's it. The deportation hearings, now twice in that process, labeled that as enough information to keep the process going, that it wasn't proven, and they acknowledged that. I think it was Judge Zenas recently made the case. It's all hearsay. There's nothing here to prove this. And by the way, they never even tried. And that's why. Every time right now they're trying to go through the process, they're being shouted down because they don't have any evidence. And then acting like it's all political judges, except no, now we're seeing Trump appointees making the same point. And just to be clear about that again, in case you missed it, they're using in this secondary conversation, rather the article is, that why they thought he was potentially trafficking is because he was already suspected of being a gang member. So now you have two allegations that have never been fleshed out that are being built together to make the case that we shouldn't care about his constitutional rights. Now, look, if you find out tomorrow that he's guilty of all of these things, it still doesn't change the point. So don't get tugged over into the idea that we're trying to suggest he's not a bad person. It's irrelevant. The proof, the evidence, that's what matters. And all I'm saying is they never even tried to do it, and that should matter to you. After the law enforcement officer asked the illegal migrant in a serious, and by the way, even at that time, guys, see, this is where New York Post is showing their hand. He was given a withholding of removal, so you can't argue he's an illegal alien. The reality of that is he's being allowed to be here under that dynamic. That was the Trump administration, but they want to make it out to be illegal because it sells more, including if anyone else in the car had a license. He then conferred with the troopers. He goes, quote, "You know what you got here, right?" One trooper asked, adding that he thought Abrego was human trafficking. That's the best they can do. A recording of them going, "I think that's what this is." But let's jump down to see what actually happened, shall we? Ultimately, Abrego Garcia was only given a citation for driving while with an expired license and allowed to go on his way. Right. And then weeks later went on to go back to them and present himself for his hearing, or rather his checkups every year that he never missed for 14 years straight. Every time showing up going, "I'm here to check in. You're legally allowed to be here. Okay. Got my job, my family, married a U.S. citizen." That's the best they can do. He was given a citation for driving with an expired license. Gee, I sure hope that's not the metric by which we're accused of human trafficking. What do you think? Now, if you can read the article for yourself, the point is that he had people in his car, that they had bags. I mean, yeah, for all we know, he was doing that. But that's not the point here. The point is that they never charged that, so you can't keep screaming that up today. You can't point back to what you think should have happened and make that the case. Pam Bondi, Donald Trump, the rest of them have floated this completely baseless idea. Now, I will include this clip I went over that goes back to the main points, just like we said before, 58 minutes long if you'd like to watch it again. And here are all the links to the court documents that you can't deny that quite literally make that break it all down for you guys. They are using what I just said, a bunch of manipulated information to make a case of why you should ignore what they're doing that is wrong. Regardless of whether Garcia is the person you think he is, what they're doing is wrong in every way. Now, this is actually important. So we posted this when we did the show. This is the clip the Bulwark shared. This is going well, where Trump is just really embarrassing himself about being wrong, and no one wants to admit that. And above part, he simply says, "Holy SHIT, he actually thought that very obvious labels were tattoos." So the now deleted post, by the way, oh my God, he deleted, oh no, this one too. So he's been deleting these posts, which I think is funny. We showed you this recently. Basically said, "Prove it." And I simply said, here you go. Now the real question is, had no one posted these under your nose, would you have carried on claiming this was false because you chose to never look for yourself? And there are all the links, the images showing you he doesn't have that on his hand. And so here's the way they responded, which I didn't get to show you since it was the last show. It was just on that statement. He followed up, and look, she's got the fight image from Trump. Here's what he says. And this is exactly the case I'm making. right? The claim is a lie. And they were on the side going, no, prove it. You're wrong. Trump is right. Okay, I proved them wrong. Here's the response. He's a wife beater and a human trafficker. At this point, I could care less about whether a tattoo is fake or not. Oh, you mean the thing that you said we were wrong about? You said prove it, and then we do prove it, and you go, well, it's irrelevant because he did bad things. Now, whether that's a bot or not, I don't know. Or an IDF member, I don't know. But people like that exist, and that's why we do this. Because people like that are, and I mean really more so for the people that might be willing to hear the alternative. The problem is that people have been so carved into this that they ultimately will ignore whatever because they've created the secondary narrative that allows them to go, well, even if, right? How about the point where they go, due process is not required for illegal aliens. And then when you prove that it is, they go, well, they gave it to him anyway. Well, no, they didn't. But funny how you just screamed they didn't need to. But then when we prove they do, you go, well, they did anyway. That's even what Rubio and them have been doing. Well, we did give a process. So it's funny how the evolving of the conversation proves to you that they know they're lying. And we just can't acknowledge that, it seems. It's incredible. But it says, what the F is wrong with you people? Why is a criminal so effing important? See, I'm convinced it's a bot, personally. And they blocked me, is the point. After making this comment, they blocked me, so I can't respond. It says, give us a break and just go get a job already. Insane to me that this is the real people. They're wrong and exposed with the fact that they're wrong, and that's their response. What's wrong with you for not wanting to put this person in a foreign prison because they did things that we can't prove that you're wrong about? Wife beater, human trafficking, fine. Remember that even those are really opaque because even the wife beating dynamic, the wife is out there saying that it's not what it seems like. Of course, she could be lying because it's her husband. At the very least, they're still together. They've got a family, right? So glass houses, right? I mean, there's so many people out there that I know are doing this. But the point is, human trafficking is the real argument, and that's what we just showed you. And she's willing to throw both those things at you to say, who cares? They just lied about this. Send him to prison. Even though none of those things have been charged with crimes, you haven't proven any of it, including the fact of the main claim. That is alarming. Now, how long until Casey Bird is going, send that American to El Salvador because, well, he did all the things Trump said. Here, look at all the... How long, guys? How long until that starts happening? Fractured Badger says, y'all are constantly moving goalposts to inadvertently prove just how desperate and, most disturbingly, hypocritical you are. I agree. Then says, the convicted felon 43 times over is okay. I'm sure you know what that's about. But this man doesn't deserve the due process. And it's not about deserving. It's the reality. It's static. It is. And they didn't do it. He says, you a la carte Americans are pathetic. You should be embarrassed. I frankly agree. But now, whether you agree with the 34 federal, the felonies rather, because he's talking about Trump right there. Trump is found guilty on 34 felony counts. Now, I'm one of the people that pointed out how politically driven this was, because it was. That's not to say he's not a criminal. I think they're all criminals, guys. You can prove every one of these people are involved. I mean, even just from a foreign policy level, the guy's bombing Yemen, murdering people, bombing the Sudan, they are criminals. They are war criminals. Obama, Trump, Bush, Biden, all of them. The point, though, is that on record, which is the same thing we're hearing right over here, he claims that not even were actually charged, just the floated possibility of human trafficking. That's enough, right? But Trump can have 34 felony counts from the court, and that's not, but we like him, right? He's on our side. It's just showing you the selective outrage because you're supposed to. Now, make sure you heard me on that I'm not saying I agree that that's actually the reality. It's just funny how what you could pick and choose you decide to be outraged about. Now, we also discussed recently on the 29th that Garcia was already moved to a prison that's not for gang members. And in the actual article, it makes it explicitly clear that they're not even, there is nobody here that even is accused of being a gang member, that they do not allow it. And they move Garcia there. Okay, and so the point is they make in the article, well, that directly contradicts the main claim of all this. They have given up ultimately on that and now are on the idea that, well, he's not father of the year. That's desperation as far as I'm concerned, and sadly it worked for some people. But remember that part about the new place he was moved to. Aaron Melnick, a lawyer in this conversation, says the DOJ said it submitted a clear, this is a quote, a clear official declaration under oath that the U.S. does not have custody or control over the Venezuelans in El Salvador, which is interesting. I mean, I would have pushed back on that immediately, but it goes despite Trump and Noem suggesting otherwise, because we just talked about it. Trump just recently said, I could bring him back if I want to, and said he won't. We just talked about that. This is the whole, quote, meat of that declaration. He says there's a reason they're losing in court. El Salvador, a sovereign independent nation with its own domestic law and international obligations governing the detention of individuals, El Salvador makes its own sovereign decisions, including with respect to detention. Okay. Here it says, funny update, in the Bollesburg AEA case, ACLU argues that the U.S. has constructive custody of the people it's paying Bukele to jail. The government protests that ACLU cites a handful of vague statements by a few officials, but the government has a declaration. Let's see. A handful of vague statements, that's what they just wrote. But it says, so who are these few officials who have said the U.S. is responsible for imprisoning people of El Salvador? Oh, just the Salvadorian president, the U.S. Secretary of State, the White House press secretary, the U.S. It's insanely stupid how dumb all of this is. The reality is they keep telling you that that's the case. But then let's put it this way. This reality is that they'll make whatever argument they need to make the case at the moment, regardless of whether 30 seconds ago they said the opposite. What does that remind you of? Now, this is just what my mind draws parallel to. I can't stop seeing that throughout the Israel-U.S. propaganda, where they'll just throw out whatever. They'll lie to you completely about something they just told you 10 seconds ago because, well, they think they can do that. In this case, it's right in front of you, that they're literally telling you the opposite, and it's because either they want you to think they can when they want you to think that when they can't, or vice versa. Either way, ACLU is making the argument here, which I agree with. If they're still paying them, which is they are, they're paying him to jail them, and there's no legal precedent for doing that in the first place, they are the ones in control of the situation. We know this. Now, this is interesting too. Isaac Sowell says the entire article is remarkable, but this in particular is an extremely underdiscussed story on Bukele and the burgeoning U.S. relationship. And Melnick says one major part of the deal with Bukele is that's gone underdiscussed. Bukele managed to get the U.S. to deport several MS-13 leaders who could testify about deals he made with gang members before the state of exception, which is when they removed civil liberties. Now those allegations won't be aired publicly in court. Why? Because he selectively chose the ones they would send back to him. Now, I think there's something much darker in all this, if that's not dark enough already. And I'll read to you directly from two different articles. This one is from the Times. This one is from Drop Site News. The point, as this article says in the headline, behind Trump's deal to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador's most feared prison, new details deepen questions about the deportation, showing that El Salvador's president pressed for assurances that the migrants were really members of the there's 2 points in this. That's one of them. That it seems that Bukele is upset that it turns out they did clearly send people that were not gang members. Now, it's not because he cares about whether they're gang members, but it's about how this dynamic is working in his country in regard to his agreements with MS-13. That, by the way, was started in LA in the United States, which is relevant, not in El Salvador. The point is that there's a clear dynamic of the U.S. involvement with this group and Bukele. And ultimately here, it seems as if this person is afraid to allow them to testify in court in the United States. Now, we just talked about this. Remember, we just talked about the idea that they were removing a leader. Let me actually see if I can get that to pop up. No, it doesn't pop up, unfortunately. Oh, wait. Yep, I think that was it. Outstanding. Yeah, right there. Okay. So here, I'll bring it up for you. This is important. We just talked about this. And remember we said, this was 24 days ago. Justice Department moved to drop case against alleged top MS-13 leader. And remember I said, why would they do that? They got the case that's been ongoing for a while. This person is about to be charged and go to prison. Isn't that what we want from these actual MS-13 leaders kind of dynamic, right? Assuming that's what he is, but they were going to go to court and present the evidence like they're not doing anywhere else. And instead of holding this person accountable for being a terrible person, part of actual trafficking, drug deal, all of it, they dropped the case and sent him to El Salvador. To a place where these people clearly, whether or not they're even before the conversation of Bukele dealing with them in the background, clearly, I mean, we talked about the barber that got sent there, and the gang members and the officers in the prison were taking turns beating him up. Clearly, there's more going on there where these people are allowed to have influence, and you're going to let this monster who you have in your grasp, who will have information about that relationship, get dropped case and sent back to El Salvador. So now, what was my question? What will this be? We'll have to pay attention to see if this was about, was there a reason he wanted him? That does seem to be the case now. Or were they trying to hide something? Was it about setting a precedent for sending real terrorists or real MS-13 members instead of I had all these thoughts, right? I'll include this for you. Well, now we're at the point. Here's what the article says. Early on, Trump advisors identified El Salvador as a promising option. Mr. Bukele, who has called himself the world's coolest dictator, which he really said, which is just an interesting over-the-window change we're in right now, had come into office pledging to crack down on gang crime. Remember, that was the whole thing. Now, briefly, remember the reality? They will list it off. The point is he took control of the government in a way that people argue was not organic. Even the election was riddled with cyber attacks and allegations of manipulation and fraud and theft. And of course, he's powerful enough and he used his position to shout it. The point is that ultimately took control, removed the opposition. It's now a one-party state. He suspended civil liberties and it's a problem. But the interesting overlap is that there has been a decrease in violence. And a lot of people seem to be okay with that. That's where this comes into play, where it seems that this was a deal with the devil in the analogy sense, where instead of actually stopping the problem, he embedded the problem in the government. Now, going back to Whitney's books and the background discussion therein, it seems like he's modeling himself after the actual deep state in this country. Or like with Israel. As they all screamed to fight in the deep state, here's an example of him building that. Early on, Trump advisor identified El Salvador as a promising option. Coolest dictator, he called himself, had come into office pledging to crack down on gang crime. Matt Gaetz, who late last year resigned from Congress and was Mr. Trump's initial pick to lead the Justice Department, visited Mr. Bukele last year. Remember at the time, what did he say? We already showed you that. He said, hey, we can lock up those and Americans too. He said that on the record. I believe that was a PBS article. And toured his new terrorism confinement center known as CCOT, which is a concentration camp. It's horrible. It's one of the worst. There's been reports on it for a long time now. A sprawling facility with 8 cell blocks, each holding 3,000 prisoners, apparently that has right now way more than it can actually supposed to hold. Mr. Bukele was willing to let the United States use his prisons with conditions. He told Mr. Rubio and Mercuricio Claver Caron, Mr. Trump's Latin American envoy. He did not want to bring in non-criminal migrants. He could not convince Salvadorians that he was prioritizing their national interests if he turned their country into a dumping ground for U.S. deportees from other countries, which is what it now seems to have been. He explained this to Trump's aides. Now, remember, we already saw a little pushback on this where he was calling this out, and there's background conversations that were leaked out. The reality is there's a little bit of discord between this, but this is typical U.S. government dealing. They will screw you every way they can. That's how they work. And that's left and right, just the government. He says, but he did agree to take in violent criminals, no matter their nationality, for a fee, which would help subsidize the country's prison system. Now, Mr. Bukele had his own request. And this is where it gets really interesting. A list of MS-13 leaders, or so he says, by the way, that he wanted released from U.S. custody and sent to El Salvador, where he said they could be interrogated by his security officers. Now, many of these do seem to be members of this gang that he seems to have potentially worked with. But I still point the same thing out. How do we know for sure? If they're not even verifying any of this stuff and there's no process, he could be accused. This could be a El Salvadorian citizen that has dirt on him. Somebody that ran away because he doesn't want to get killed by the government that's killing its dissidents. Think about that. That's a chilling reality that very well could be part of this. Now, it says some U.S. law enforcement officials were alarmed over the prospect of sending back leaders of MS-13 now facing charges for alleged crimes in the United States. See, even then they say alleged because even though we know these people are, the information we have on them shows they're part of the gang, they haven't been brought to court and the evidence hasn't been presented. And so even they say alleged, but the reality is today, they're rapidly destroying this country in 1,000 different ways by using your hatred of other things against each other. But the interesting part of this is that they were outraged. They're going, you're going to send back gang members to a place where they are at least far less held accountable? Like, how does that make sense with even the narratives that you're putting forward? And then, of course, the argument is that, there's many different overlaps of how that will come back to play. But he says both the Treasury Department and the Justice Department have accused Mr. Bukele's government of making a secret pact with MS-13. So in case you misunderstand that, the U.S. government, multiple entities of it, have said he dealt with MS-13, which does seem to be the reality. offering the leaders of MS-13 that are behind bars special privileges to keep homicides down in El Salvador. So now, still what I said before, I still question whether that is really what people think. I don't know how we can prove one way or the other, seeing as how it's a controlled entity right now. So it's certainly that we're just being possible we're being lied to about it. Or let's just even say that most of the people are happy. How long will that maintain? I mean, if you're literally, like, you might as well say MS-13 now runs the country and they're willing to dial down the crime so it doesn't look as bad, or the government working with them in the same dynamic. I mean, it's the same point we make about the mafia forward discussion. Prohibition forward. Is it possible the mafia just basically took over the government? That's what Whitney's books are about in part. That the infiltration, if not the becoming of that same dynamic. And the reality is that we're seeing the same thing. This is not what we pretend we're fighting for. Okay, you're dealing with the villains of the world that just put on a pretty face. That's what the government of the U.S. has always done, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Israel. You look around the world, it's obvious. And it says, of course, Bukele's denied the claims, of course. But it says what Bukele is desperate for is to get these guys back in El Salvador before they could talk to U.S. courts, said Douglas Farah of El Salvador Expert, who between 2018 and 2022 collaborated with the Justice Department. Vulcan Task Force, which targeted MS-13 as a U.S. military contractor. Now, let's be clear again. I mean, they could be making all this up too. It could be this is not the truth. The point is that there's a lot of evidence that supports this discussion, and you can see the bigger point is you can see the way that they've already abused this in the past, and it goes before him, it goes before Trump. So this seems to be an extension of the same kind of dynamic. But it says, nevertheless, U.S. officials agreed to send El Salvador around a dozen senior members of MS-13, including a high-ranking leader named Cesar Humberto Lopez Larios, who had been in U.S. custody, that's the one we're talking about, awaiting a trial on narco-terrorism conspiracy charges. Mr. Bukele has so far not received everyone he sought. Interesting, but U.S. officials say they still intend to send additional gang leaders that he's requested. So it begs the question, who were all the others? I mean, we could literally prove that most of them, if not all of them, 75% of them didn't even have criminal records, guys. They're just average people who have the wrong tattoos. That's really what happened, which is just mind-blowing that we don't think that is one of the biggest travesties. Like, in this country, the idea of what just happened right there, that's a scar on this country forever. I don't know why we can't be real about that. I mean, I do for some people's positions, but if you're on a partisan side, got to call this stuff out. Now, next one. Drop site news. Now it says, and the title is, Secret Bukele Deal Lies Behind Trump's El Salvador Deportations. Now it says, U.S. President Donald Trump and Salvadorian President Bukele have long presented themselves as crusaders of justice, battling the scourge of transnational criminal gangs. Earlier this year, the Trump administration declared MS-13 a violent Salvadorian gang that originated in the United States and other Latin American criminal groups to be terrorist organizations, which, let's not forget, was a tactical move. He did it right before he started this, and then the Alien Enemies Act, and they work together, because the point is you need to at least present the framing as this is a terrorist organization that's being done, or rather, driven by the Venezuelan government. Without that, it doesn't apply to the Alien Enemies Act. But that's already come out, even with their framing that is completely flimsy. It's not. It's just, that's one of the legal pushbacks we're going to get into in a second around that act that Rubio's now going, no judge has the right to do. Yeah, they do. That's exactly how this works. The point is clearly that they tried to frame this as a way to make the case that Venezuela was invading this country and that it was an organized enemy state actor. None of those things are true. But it says the narrative hit a cinematic apogee earlier this month when Trump swept up a clutch of Venezuelans he said, were hardened gangsters, paired them up with some alleged members of MS-13, sent them down south to be detained in Bukele's terrorism prison. The truth turns out to be much messier. Not only did Trump deport Venezuelans who were likely completely innocent, but also, and look, just be clear, many of them you can now prove are completely innocent. Here legally, no criminal record. But also a specific MS-13 member who is emblematic of alleged corruption at the highest ranks of the Salvadorian government, a man called Grenas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The importance of Grenas, whose legal name, as we just mentioned earlier, Cesar Humberto Lopez Larios, lies in what he knows. According to a federal indictment, and as a leader of MS-13, Grenas was involved in secret negotiations between the gang and Bukele's government, aimed at lowering gang violence in exchange for political support. That's what we're talking about. Bukele denies the negotiations ever took place, but has long sought to get a hold of high-ranking members of MS-13 who participated in. Work to keep such figures out of the hands of the United States before they can have their day in open court. The Bukele government has also resisted extraditing a number of MS-13 leaders that were requested by the U.S. Interesting. Had Granas's case gone forward in the United States, the sordid links between Bukele and the gang he is famous for warring against may have been aired publicly. Instead, federal charges were dismissed 4 days before his expulsion, we just showed you, due to sensitive and important foreign policy considerations, which meaningless, according to a recently unsealed Justice Department document. The Justice Department initially requested the document be sealed because its release, quote, could cause harm to the government's relationship with El Salvador. Well, isn't that pretty obvious? So this becomes really clear what's going on. Now, under what he knew, it says Granas is an alleged member of the, how do you say that? Ranfla Nacional, which is the name given to the MS-13 board of directors. I think it's the something of death or something. I think it's later down here. Bukele has consistently denied the negotiations with the gang ever took place, but explosive revelations from El Faro, the news organization, showed that starting in 2019, 2 high-ranking Bukele administration officials secretly snuck into Salvadorian prisons alongside masked men to meet with incarcerated MS-13 leaders. Members of the MS-13 board of directors met multiple times with Osiris Luna, the national director of prisons, and Carlos Marroquin, the director of the Social Fabric Government Office. So the links are, this is reporting. I mean, these things happen. What the reality is about what they were trying to achieve, you can decide, but I think the evidence is enough to recognize there's something happening here. And it says, during the negotiations with Luna and Marroquin, the gang's goal was to, quote, maintain the power and influence of MS-13 and obtain benefits from the government of El Salvador. So now you literally have the U.S. government working with El Salvadorian government to maintain the power and influence of MS-13. Now, does the Trump administration know that? Do they care? You have to realize the entire premise of fighting these gangs is undermined by the reality that you're working with the person who's literally maintaining their influence, whether through prison systems or not, and then just tactfully lowering the death and suffering for the time being, or, you know, however that works. Now it says it says in exchange, MS-13 agreed to reduce the number of public murders, quote, which politically benefited the government of El Salvador by creating the perception that the government was reducing the murder rate. Now look at that. See, a lot of things we talk about are just kind of my instincts and, you know, how things make sense when you just kind of, I put out thoughts all the time. Well, you know, this is what that makes sense, or this is what I think this would not add up, or, you know, something seems wrong about this, you know, and here we go. How often you guys following the show look at that. That's exactly what we were sensing in this. But I wasn't telling you I knew for sure one or the other. Even still, we should question this. But it says, more importantly, MS-13 agreed to provide political support to Bukele's party in the lead up to the consequential legislative elections in 2021. U.S. prosecutors allege in exchange for greater benefits from the government. So look, 2 things. This is the U.S. prosecutors are making this case. Up here, when we talk about the benefits, basically maintain the power of influence of MS-13, that's a Justice Department indictment. Just think about how obvious all this is. That means they know this. They know that at some level, people within the government structure know this too. And yet people are still being lied to by the government. Now it goes on to say the Treasury Department of the U.S. also alleged in 2020, Bukele's administration provided financial incentives to MS-13 to reduce gang violence in exchange for political support. Multiple statements like this from the U.S. administration. According to Mendez Dardon, from WOLA, the U.S. sanctions on these 2 officials are significant. Quote, this shows there is enough evidence that the reduction of violence in El Salvador was compromised. There were political negotiations between the gangs and the government of El Salvador. In 2021, after the decisive legislation elections that gave Bukele's party a supermajority that he now calls a one-party state, exactly what they tell you over here we should be fighting against, his administration removed the country's attorney general, which we've told you already, and 5 members of the Supreme Court, which we've told you already. That's called democracy, according to everybody else, right? After publicly stating they would engage in extraditions to the U.S. of these members. Okay, so you have to understand that the people he removed that allowed him to run again, by the way, which is why he's still in power, were the ones that were trying to remove these people, right? Or rather, basically the people that would then be able to show the information about this dynamic. Now it says the Bukele administration also dismantled a unit of Salvadorian prosecutors that were investigating the meetings of him and the gang members. This is all stuff on the record. Like, this is like what Netanyahu's doing, and we can't be honest about this. It's so transparent. No, but, you know, it's worth having a conversation about. Let's just say this country lives in peace and harmony for the next 100 years. If that's the case, then we should reflect on that. But the reality is hard to think that it's going to go anywhere other than another despotic, controlled dictator situation, because that's what we can see. And they're working with the very gangs they tell you they're trying to stop. That's how this tends to work. That's how your government in this country works in the United States. It's how seemingly every government works, in my opinion. But the evidence is everywhere. And, you know, just back to the idea that they removed Supreme Court justices, the attorney general, the prosecutors investigating, and we don't see what that is. Like, this is my point about people on the conservative side that just go, yeah, because he's the guy on our side, so do it. Get rid of the Democrats. And you're acting like that's what he's going after. You're lost. And I don't think that's what most people are thinking right now. But those people are either blind supporters, like the people I could list off that you know about that are going, yay, we're winning about everything all the time, or people that just don't care because they're bad people. Then, according, it says, to Alfaro's reporting, the truce between Bukele's government and the MS-13 seems to have collapsed in 2022. Now, this is interesting because it seems that this may have driven to where we are now. And maybe that's why we've seen differences. But it says, last year, Bukele announced a state of exception. Now, that was when he, like, my point is maybe they used that claim to justify removing, you know, what we'd say constitutional rights, civil liberties, suspending the rights of people, which not supposed to be able to happen, at least in this country. And it says, to wipe out criminal groups, which cast aside due process and led to a wave of alleged human rights abuses. Okay. Well, I mean, it seems he's giving people back that he wants. It seems to be that has to do with some other conversation, so maybe there's more going on. Either way, whether he dealt with them first and now double-crossed them and just pulled all the people's rights, or they used that excuse to do so, we're not staring at a good guy here, guys. It's pretty clear. So I find it to be very relevant. Now, Richard Hanania points out, and he is... I don't remember what his background was. You can see his bio here. Different part of these different groups. He says, New York Times reports that Bukele was uncomfortable with the Trump administration sending him people who hadn't been convicted of a crime. Now, I don't think it's because he cares, like we said. I think it's because he wanted this to be a demonstration that he's going after the bad guys for the people that he needs the support of in a public eye. He wanted evidence that the Venezuelans were actually gang members. He says, let that sink in. The guy who calls himself the world's coolest dictator, who is famous for mass prison camps, thinks that Trump administration is going too far and locking people up without evidence. It's a crazy way to look at it. Trump administration ended up giving El Salvador, quote, evidence in the form of their scorecard that said if you had tattoos and that you were a gang member. Really, that's too much of a simplification. It was subjective nonetheless. It was like a 4-point thing. And if you have tattoos, I think it was 2 points. And if you have you're in a certain location, that was 2 points. And all you need to do was 4. So the proof is literally tattoos and being in the wrong place was enough to get you sent to El Salvador. That was already covered. Very clear. And that they made up this weird scorecard because they didn't have the evidence that they required. It says they had no idea who they were sending. Random people who were picked up going about their lives. Some of them with upcoming asylum hearings, which meant they were here legally. The administration was so careless that they tried sending 8 women to men's prisons in El Salvador, but they had to be returned. Yeah, real efficient. Money right there. And, you know, on top of the completely illegal things they're doing. Insane. And he goes, if this doesn't shock your conscience, then something is wrong with you. And I agree with that. This is the article we're talking about. And by the way, just on a side note, he says, why do they have to fill these planes with innocent people? Because immigrants commit very little crime. Now, this is an interesting discussion. Now, to be very clear, whatever side you think you're on this, if you look into the evidence that we can find, pretty much everything I can find suggests that it's at the very least, not more than average people. Now, there's all sorts of debate about that. But if you really think about it, it makes sense to me as well. I mean, I'm working through kitchens my entire life. I mean, that's most of the people that work in the background, and even as hiring in the background. I mean, there are people that I would want that in half cases because 1, they work harder than anybody, and 2, because they were worried about the law, that they were always on the up and up, always afraid to drive too fast. I hung out with these. The point is, in my experience, which could be limited, I agree that it seems that most people in that position logically would probably be less. Now, that's not to say that maybe there's an extreme part of that, or because of that same logic, they do the worst things. But I think on the average reality, you could pretty much logically understand that most of them wouldn't want to because they don't want to get deported. So then you can look at all the actual statistics and the research and the studies, which say that thing too. But yet we get all these, it's like they keep saying that Democrats want them all because they're all going to vote Democrat. That's not the reality. As I've said many times, at the very least, it's pretty all over the place. But yet they keep screaming these same old things because they're doing the same old thing. Either way, something about this is off. I think we can all see what's going on. Homeland Security said the real story here is that Biden administration was releasing gangs into American communities, which, by the way, is what they point at when they say invasion. So you're going to claim that Venezuela is invading with a terrorist group, but then say, but Biden is one that let them in, but that doesn't sound like an invasion. Oh, and round we go. It's all a narrative control dynamic. I do believe that there's a weaponized dynamic going on, but it's not who you think. But Aaron Melnick says every time the DHS claims someone they have is a member of Tren de Aragua, he says, remember that they refuse to put any of these allegations in front of a judge in court. It's because they know that when they do, the allegations fall apart. Whether it's a left or right judge, which is continually seen. The point is, here's one of the judges tearing ISIS claims apart. And they basically shot it down and said, you have no evidence. Because they don't, you understand? This is not my personal opinion. They're presenting subjective claims in a court of law that requires proof. I mean, this is even when they're trying to find their way in front of a judge that might be more amenable to their position, and they're still losing. If all you can do is go radical judges, they're not even looking at the evidence. They are presenting things that are even barely evidence. In this case, it says they're doubling down on this professional soccer player. We've already talked about him being in Tren de Aragua, despite the fact that their only evidence was a Real Madrid tattoo, football, soccer, that the guy and the guy throwing the horns in a picture. That's not a joke. That's what they had written down. Think about that. And you realize that's a very popular, famous tattoo. Okay. And they say the Venezuelan soccer player, in quotes, like the Maryland dad, same thing. Was in the United States illegally. He was a member of Tren de Aragua gang. Okay. The case here is about, this one, if I remember correctly, was somebody who was in a process. He didn't just jump the fence. He was in the process of either asylum or going for citizenship, but they still call that illegal, and it's just a gross misrepresentation. If you are in the process of seeking citizenship or asylum, you can disagree that they should be doing those things or be allowed to, or maybe they're using that as a way to circumvent whatever crime. Fine. Those are all valid considerations. That doesn't mean you could pretend they're now illegal when they're not. The bottom line, though, is even if he was, all of these things should have been presented to a judge in regard to, at the very least, sending him to a prison in a foreign country. Or if that's ever even allowed to happen. But the main crux of the point is what you should care about, which most people seem to step right over in their interest of a political side, is that he's not part of this gang. His lawyers have spoke up. Everyone's calling this out. And most of the people that are there, they're now being proven in court to not be these things. Or at the best they have is what they presented as evidence to claim they are, which is completely up in the air. That should matter to you. You know why? Because they're doing it to you too. In your life every day. If you can't see that by now, you're not paying attention. And then Billy Binion of Reason simply says, here's your daily reminder, or just reminder, that the U.S. is still jailing Ozturk, the woman from Tufts University. Think about how crazy that is. She wrote an op-ed. What was that, a month ago? The State Department admittedly found zero evidence that she's anti-Semitic. And that's admittedly. They don't have any evidence of anything. Well, even then, that's even when you can just claim Palestine supports anti-Semitic, and they still can't find any evidence. Yet she's behind bars right now. She was here legally. She was a PhD student. It actually still blows me away that these things are not like paramount. Like everyone's talking about Abrego Garcia. Yeah, there's valid points there. But think about how wild this is. A PhD student who wrote an op-ed who you can read for yourself. As Glenn Greenwald went over, it is well done. It's very fact-based and about the genocide. But even that, even if you think that's enough, it's like we are in the twilight zone. That she can be held without charge in a prison for this long. Legally here, guys. So in principle, there is no difference than this happening to you. It is the same thing. And then, of course, the barber, same conversation. The guy was in the process of a legal stay, which means he was either seeking asylum or citizenship, and on top of that, was not given any due process in regard to the allegations against him. And this is one of the cases that have now been very clearly shown to not be that he's a criminal. No criminal record, not part of the gang. This was the guy who got abused by the guards and MS-13 people or whatever, the gang members or people that are there for other crimes. And I find that to be just, it makes me sick. It makes me sick that the people that not only can it happen, but that you got people out there that will laugh about it because, well, he's a Democrat or whatever grotesque mental gymnastics they can make to pretend it doesn't matter. I forgot about this clip. I don't think I forgot. This is, of course, the point is, I believe he's a Democrat, which means people will blindly dismiss it, despite the fact that what he's going to say is probably right. Let's listen to it together. I'm just going to download it real quick. Here it is.
There's no issue right now that should concern Americans more than the elimination and destruction of due process.
Yeah, so he's a Democrat from California. But, you know, it makes me sick how easy this is for some people to just disregard that. Oh, Democrats just want to raise up Garcia because you're listening to some Republican podcaster. Like, you're doing exactly what you're pointing at the other side because you're both doing it. The truth is, regardless of the left and right narratives, this is about due process. It's fundamentally easy to prove. It's facts. It's right in front of you. You just want to pretend that doesn't matter as long as X, Y, and Z, which shows you that you are the problem.
Not just now for U.S. citizens, but for people that are here, whether it's a legal status or because they've been invited to this country to apply for asylum. Now, we've heard tonight, and I want to go ahead and speak a little bit more.
Now, that point's important. And this is about Biden, right? And I said the same thing. The same way with Trump randomly saying these aliens are okay to work at our restaurants because we want that. It's the same thing. Wave your hand and just declare something. So when the next administration comes in and says, nope, those are all legal aliens, you're out. Is that okay? I mean, it's the same thing we're seeing today. The point is that Biden just basically said, come in, we'll give you citizenship, right? We'll grant you asylum and just bringing people in, just waving his hand. Well, that's what the president does. I'm not okay with any of that. But the reality is, in regard to the president being able to do that with whatever they want, the reality is that it did happen. And there were a lot of examples of them, people getting citizenship, asylum, and that is now the legal reality. The idea that they come in and just go, never mind, because we don't agree with the previous administration is not only illegal, it's just gross. Like what they're doing is creating a circumstance where nothing means anything, everything means nothing, whatever they say goes. Same thing Biden was doing in his own right. So I just think it's frustrating that we can't be honest about this and recognize what these people are collectively doing. Again, I don't know Robert Garcia. My opinion would probably be that what they're doing is taking advantage of a moment to present themselves as the counterbalance. It's opportunism, you know, or he believes in it. I don't know, but you can decide. I'm jaded when it comes to politicians.
About Andre Romero, this young gentleman right here. He is a gay hairstylist, makeup artist who came to the United States with an asylum appointment. The United States government gave Andre an appointment to show up to the border so that he could claim asylum using our process that we created.
Now, again, that's the point, is whether you agree with that during Biden's administration or not, that's what happened. So the idea that you could lull somebody into that, or rather that Biden could do that, and then you could step in and just go, never mind, despite the fact that he's built a life here, it speaks to not only illegal, because it is, it just speaks to a vitriol, a hatred, the bringing people down to the lowest vibration and just, and abusing people. They're human beings with lives and families and dreams. And you're just going, never mind, political pawns. We're going to use you because we don't agree with those people. It's just disgusting. And they're pulling so many people in. But again, I think that they're losing control of it.
He shows up with his appointment. And what happens? He gets interrogated through the process. His initial screening is positive. And then he essentially gets taken at the border from that screening directly to an El Salvador prison in a country he knows nothing about.
Never been.
And in a process that eliminated his right through the court and due process asylum system that we've created in this country.
Now, again, the point is about El Salvador. Like, how the hell is that even something? Like, at the best, you could remove. Like, he's not like he was gallivanting around the country, for crying out loud. Why would you just put him back over the border? The idea is that this was about, in my opinion, meeting some kind of demand, or maybe his name was on a list. Either way, there's obviously something wrong with all of this. That we could ever argue that you could just pluck him up and send him to a foreign government. He's never been to a place that they're going to rock him up for life. For what? What crime did he commit? In any context, he wasn't there illegally. Again, I just like that has to matter. If I somehow find out that this doesn't matter to half this country, I don't know why I'm doing this. Because I do not believe we are this bad.
What kind of America is this, where we are doing this to people that are seeking asylum? We're sending them to a foreign prison. And I want to note, Andre's family describes him as someone that is sweet, that's kind, that's gentle. And yet we're sending him to a notorious prison in a very vulnerable position. I also want to note that folks, an agent said, oh, well, he has some tattoos. Yes, he has a crown tattoo reflective of a festival back in his home city and state in Venezuela. It has nothing to do with gangs. He's never been convicted of anything to do with gangs. But because an ICE agent, who was, by the way, a disgraced former police officer,
seems like a running theme, huh?
Made these claims, Andre is now in a foreign prison, and his family and his lawyers have not heard anything about him in weeks.
That's the craziest thing. It's longer than that now. No communication. Obvious reasons why. I mean, common theme we see there, right? Well, there's one other point he said.
Sir, made these claims, Andre is now in a
right. Is it the Intercept article going back? I think it was 2019, 2018. That was already making this case back then. It's not unique to Trump or anybody. I think it's just what our government does. But that they were caught lying all over. These ICE agents were lying all over the place to get these people deported, even back then. So it's just nothing new, it seems. It's speechless, man. It's just insane. 50 days since he was imprisoned in El Salvador with no right to challenge the evidence against him. That statement right there, no right to challenge the evidence against him. That's not who we pretend we are. I don't care who you are. No judicial review, no due process. He was sent there because an ICE officer thought his mom and dad tattoos were gang tattoos. Now, the Trump administration is eyeing new destinations for illegal immigrants, maybe because the Bukele conversation's getting unhappy because they're not, as usual, the U.S. government is not doing what it says it's going to do. So they're eyeing new destinations. And guess what lovely places they want to send other people to? Innocent people like we're seeing today. Libya, Rwanda, bastions of freedom out there, largely because of U.S. foreign policy and Israel foreign policy. May 1st, Trump administration eyes new destinations for illegal immigrants. And by the way, American citizens, since they keep floating that point, and that's not going away. We'll come to that section in a second about the new amendment that the Republicans voted down, which says you can't deport deport Americans. But first the Trump administration is reportedly considering sending illegal immigrants with criminal records to Libya and Rwanda. But see, as much as it's like saying deport Americans, but we're going to look into the law. We can already see that they don't care about any of this. That at best is a narrative they use to hide what they do. With criminal records is what they claim. They claim everyone they sent were the worst gangbanger, murderous, rapists they've ever seen. And now we know 75% of them didn't even have a record. They're lying to you. And if you're okay with that, you're a child. The reality clearly is that these places are not okay. And most of them are not going to have criminal records if we have any indication of so far of what they've done. Because the report suggests this could be an effort to deter foreigners from entering U.S. illegally. Well, gee, you think? We'll send you to a foreign prison forever with no chance of even pushing back. Maybe they'll think twice about coming in this country, which is probably the point. I mean, and what's hilarious to me is that we do have a very clear undercurrent of how that's used as Trump even already saw, allowing his hotels and different places to keep using them because he got pushback from people that higher ups that need that to keep their businesses going. So there might be a problem there going forward. But it says President Donald Trump signed an executive order in January directing top officials to facilitate international cooperation and agreements to send asylum seekers elsewhere. So just hear what he just said right there. Asylum seekers, not people coming in illegally, people coming to the border seeking asylum in many cases because of U.S. foreign policy and just send them to Rwanda, send them to Libya, put them in El Salvadorian prison because they dared to seek what you guys tell us is the American dream. Think about that. In addition to sending migrants with criminal records, Trump officials are also hoping to enter formal negotiations with Libya to strike a so-called safe third country agreement, which would allow the U.S. to send asylum seekers apprehended at the border. Think of how they're framing that. To Libya. Apprehended at the border? You mean people are coming and going, I'm seeking asylum, and you're apprehending them? Like, they're framing these people as illegal immigrants. That's not by accident. I feel like I use it often right now. To me, that seems desperate. The reason I say that is because if you stand back and look at it, there's an easier way they could frame this. You are literally just clumsily conflating asylum seekers with illegal immigrants because clearly you need that to meet some kind of number you're aiming for, or because of somebody else, some other country. To me, that's insane. Like, that's literally saying, like, you might as well just say sending American citizens that are apprehended at the border. It's the same dynamic. It's not the same thing, but in principle, you're talking about people who are going through a process, who have rights, and just arresting them and sending them somewhere else, potentially to prison, which makes no sense. It says both countries have a history of widespread, as Rwanda, Libya. In fact, here, let's just show you this first. I said, hey, Grok, is Libya currently safe for travelers? Just anybody? And it says Libya is not safe for travelers due to ongoing conflict, crime, terrorism, and kidnapping risks. Most governments advise against travel to Libya. You know why Libya is that way? Because of the U.S. government, and it's rather the NATO regime change the U.S. government led. That ended with the rape of the leader who gave the highest quality of life to people in Libya and all of Africa until they did that. Now it sells open slaves, or at least it was following that, on an open market in the place they called liberated. And really now, as you can see, it's just a bunch of warring conflict zones. We can still pretend it's Libya on the map. It's not. It's gone. Different people think they own different parts. It's not. This is the game they play. That's globalism in a way. The point is, in regard to just, these are the justifications used to take these things, or rather keep them in chaos until they later need to use it for something else. But think of the joke of saying, we're going to use Libya as a safe third country for people seeking legal asylum that we're going to apprehend and send to Libya. You know, you could make this all about Donald Trump if you want to, because that's easy. It's lazy to go bad Trump, but in the same way, by going bad Trump, you get the other side that goes, oh, that's all it's about, so never mind, I'm going to ignore how gross this is. It plays both ways. It's not about Trump. You're being used. It's about U.S. government and how they don't care about you. So if you ignore all this because you think you're defending Trump, you're lost in this. You're being played. If you think it's all about Trump, equally, you're being played. Libya's prison conditions. Now, since both countries have a history of widespread and systemic human rights abuses. Like, you couldn't have picked a different, you know, the reason they choose those? Because none of the Western countries are going to be in line with this. Because there's a lot, every one of these countries is dealing with the same manipulations, influence, occupation, infiltration. Libya's prison conditions are often described as inhumane, life-threatening. The nation's government incarcerates migrants, political prisoners, asylum seekers. Well, there you go. Now it all lines up. Who face torture and other types of abuse in facilities controlled by the state and armed militias. So people come seeking asylum from something they're suffering, and Libya puts them in prison and maybe tortures them. Libya, whatever that means, right? Whatever weird UN kind of overlap thing they pretend is the Libyan government. Bottom line is they're going to send people there for safety, Trump says. The same is true of Rwanda. The nation's prisons are reportedly mete out torture while keeping inmates in harsh conditions. They're often overcrowded, with inmates dealing with inadequate water, food, and sanitation. There have been several reports of rampant physical abuse, such as beatings, coerced confessions. But those are your safe third country options. At least that's what he's considering. It's a joke. I mean, this is profoundly correct. Right now, what we're dealing with is different than usual. I mean, I keep saying this, but guys, we've seen in the past like a nuance, right? Like a small deviation, disagreements on small wedge points. We are seeing like outright, complete fake information telling you something, you know, it's Orwellian. I mean, every day we redefine how much that applies. They're saying war is peace right in your face. Ignorance is strength, right in your face. And now Alabama could send inmates to foreign prisons. Look at how quickly that happened. This is an individual state trying to pass bills to send inmates to foreign prisons. Inmates, not necessarily illegal immigrants. Wake up, ladies and gentlemen. This is happening. Our prisons are too soft, says Alabama. It says a proposed bill, HB 618, would allow Alabama to send people incarcerated to the state to foreign prisons. There's literally no legal reality with this. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. There's no precedent for it. This is only happening because they've allowed this to progress. It says that this bill would authorize the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections to enter in contracts with foreign nations to confine Alabama inmates, American citizens, in a penal institution or correctional facility. I'm probably going to go over this more tomorrow. Sells said he was inspired, this is from Alabama, by seeing El Salvador's prisons, the concentration camps. And he believes that if people feared being sent to prisons, that might deter crime. Yeah, sure would. But it also violate the rights and hurt people, right? And torture, whatever else we're talking about. The bottom line, it's not legal. It's unconstitutional. I don't care what benefit you think you'll gain or what negative you think you'll throw at the other side. That is insane. Now, he goes through and says very clearly that I don't think it's going to pass. I'm doing this to send a message. It's irrelevant. It's real. The bill's real. It does happen. So that whether you are doing it to send a message, it could pass. And it is normalizing the conversation. And he's pointing to El Salvador and Trump for why. I just hope people can see this. Make a clip. Get it out there. Now, we talked about Trump sending Americans to El Salvador, right? That's been floated 5 times, at least from Trump directly, more than that if you count everybody else. We also talked about the general point of it, Americans speaking out about Israel's genocide or whatever else they claim being sent. That, in principle, is the same thing. It's what's happening right now. It's a violation of due process rights or just your constitutional rights or whoever's in this country, be it illegal aliens, green card holders, visa holders, or American citizens. The principle is legally the same. That's why I think in one way it's happening. We're beginning to set the precedents, and that's alarming. Now, House Republicans kill amendment to stop ICE from deporting U.S. citizens. Very real. Okay. Here is that was from a reporting on this from Black Information Network. Here is Newsweek. Republicans vote against move to stop ICE deporting U.S. citizens. House Republicans have voted down an effort to block immigration enforcers from using federal resources to detain or deport U.S. citizens. One amendment introduced, of course, by a Democrat, and that's how this game is always played, right? So almost driving you to be okay with deporting Americans because, well, Democrats say we shouldn't. Like, I honestly think that's step one of this game. That they might just get enough people to go, yeah, because Democrats think we shouldn't, therefore we should. It really does feel like it's becoming more simplistic right now. But Representative Pramila Jayapal, which again, I've criticized many times already, the Democrat from Washington State, I mean, you can see her picture right here. I mean, she said plenty of ridiculous partisan nonsense like everybody else in this position. Sought to make it clear immigration that ICE cannot detain or deport U.S. citizens under any circumstances. GOP lawmakers killed the amendment. Now, who's to say whether they didn't want to vote for it because it undermines Trump's agenda or because they didn't want to side with a Democrat or maybe because there's a nuance to it they argue is something else, which always happens. The idea that, you could, like, for example, this is actually a terrible example. Gabbard had the Stop Arming Terrorists Act and everybody voted against it, which is insane. And really what they tried to argue was about limitations that it would be applied to, like, Israel, for example, which was like, yeah, exactly, because that account. But you see, the game is creating a nuance that you argue they're using this to hide what they're really doing. The reality is, you can look at it for yourself. It says Trump, well, just this is about, we shouldn't, you know what I hate about this? We shouldn't need a new law or a new bill that outlines what we already know. It kills me that happens all the time. And I almost wonder sometimes whether this back and forth is designed to make it like give the impression that it's not resolved when it is. You can't deport Americans. That's even what they're saying is we can't believe we're even having this conversation. So why are you introducing the bill? We don't need a new bill or a new law when reality is the Constitution and precedent has already made that case. So I honestly think it may be about watering it down to make it seem like we're debating. But Trump in April floated the idea of sending U.S. citizens convicted of violent crimes to El Salvador, or whoever they claim are convicted of violent crimes, seeing as how the process is what we skip over when this happens. The new Trump administration has also been accused of flouting court orders, directly ignoring, deporting migrants without due process following campaign promises of mass deportation. The administration has denied the accusations, which is like denying that you didn't get it. The point is, those things happen. There's no denying those things. It's obvious. They've told you that they don't even need due process, but then they go, it didn't happen because we give it to them after you're realizing people are catching on to the lie. That's the joke I made earlier. They don't get due process as legal aliens. Well, they do. Here's the proof. Well, they did give it to them anyway. It's like, well, pick a side. You can't play it, but well, that's what they always do. Any such moves risk a clash with the U.S. Supreme Court, which said the ruling last month that any deportees should first be given due process. So whether you agree with it or not, the Supreme Court ruled yet again, consistently, that is the case and always has been the case. So before we go forward, let's play this clip again. Now, I can only find the one with Judge Knapp saying things in the beginning and end, but I'll play that anyway. It's important. The middle part is where Trump is telling you we are thinking about sending Americans.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported, for his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized immigrants?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What, do you think there's special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say is coming.
Now, as I said before, the reason Trump uses extreme cases is because, like everything else we're seeing, those have no bearing on whether or not they have the legal right to do that. But if they convince you that the raping grandmother people, well, I don't care about them, they're bad. In principle, it shouldn't matter what the claim is or what the reality is. It's about whether or not they are legally able to do it. And this is how this game works. And we just went over how Alabama, with their new legislation, we have different examples of them trying to make agreements with other foreign prisons under the guise of only illegal aliens. We see where this is going. I mean, even Judge Knapp says himself right there, it's even the consideration, the claim that we're trying to see if we can displays a profound either ignorance or violation. He's a judge. He knows what he's talking about and has a lot of sway with people on the right. Now, it goes on to say on April 5th, Trump told reporters on Air Force One, and I think that was the third time he did it, we have some horrible criminals, American grown, born, and he says in that he is all for sending them to prisons like El Salvador. I don't know what the law says on it. Yeah, you do. The law is very clear. That's what's crazy about it. They're pretending they don't. Either way, like as Judge said, it's profoundly, even if he doesn't know that, that's what's alarming, that they don't know that. It is illegal and unconstitutional to deport, detain, or for deportation or recommend deportation of a U.S. citizen, a recent judge said. Now it says, this is the what's her name, Pramila, the Democrat, says, my amendment is simple, and I hope that it has bipartisan support. It simply states that none of the funds in this bill may be used by ICE to detain or deport U.S. citizens. Simple. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I hope we can all agree that U.S. citizens should never be detained by ICE or any agency conducting civil immigration enforcement. They certainly should not be deported. And this says, Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice, says the government's argument, moreover, implies, and this is about the ruling last month, that it could deport and incarcerate any person, including U.S. citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. That view refutes itself. That was before this. But of course, she's a radical judge, which again, all of them are driven by politics, guys. We know that, but that is still the proven, that is the legal reality. And again, Republicans voted this down. They vote against. Now, I forgot if I highlighted the vote. I mean, the point is, usually they give you kind of a breakdown. The point is that the majority of Republicans voted to stop this. I just think that's profound. And it shows you the slow-moving change in this country. I guess slow-moving is the wrong way to put it, but yeah, this is where it's going. Now, a couple of other overlaps that I think are important before we finish with the COVID-19 flu pandemic platform, and which that won't take that long, but a lot important to end on. Richard Hanania says, huge victory for the rule of law. Fernandez Rodrigo Jr., a Trump appointee. Now, this is the funny thing is how there's so much momentum to make you think it's all Democrat judges. I mean, Elon Musk was really the one driving a lot of this, and it seems like he's now somewhat taken a back seat, which is probably good for the truth to get out at this point. But he rules that Trump exceeded his authority in specifically the Alien Enemies Act proclamation. And this is, I guess, I'm Bruce Fine on our podcast with BitChute. I mean, this is exactly the reality. You can't make the case it's a state actor. It's not. You can't make the case that this is a Venezuelan state behind it. It's not. Even Trump claims Biden let them in. He's disproving his own claim. And it says he has issued a permanent injunction against future actions. That this happened on, where's the date on it? May 1st. He has issued a permanent injunction against future actions. No more Venezuelans to El Salvador. Now bring them back, he says. Important. Now, this is where they come in and do things where, J.D. Vance says, no judge can decide exactly what the legal reality is, exactly how this is supposed to work. Now, you could disagree with that, sure. Right? And you could try to appeal it. That's how this works. The bottom line is they're not wrong. Okay. You can very clearly see that what they're doing in their own statements prove they're lying. And all they have is sort of a partisan screaming match about that we're not wrong or we can do what we want because we're in power, whatever weird arguments are coming around. The truth is that what they're using this for is illegitimate. And they've even tried to patch it together to make the case with the terrorist designation. And then most of who they're accusing aren't even part of this, which makes it even more flimsy. So they stepped up and said, you can't keep doing this. Melnick points out a quick thread on why this Trump-appointed judge ruled the way he did. It says, first, look at the actual text of the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this is what we were just going over. It can only be used during a declared war, as Bruce Fine brought up, or any invasion or predatory incursion. Just because he claims Biden was doing that, which by default became an invasion, is not what that means. If you're going to make an argument, you would make the argument of a verified, organized invasion from a state actor. There's other things they could try to enact, but specifically the Alien Enemies Act has to have those things. That's what the point is. And it says specifically by a foreign nation or a government. And it gives you the text right there, 50 U.S. Code 21. And it says Trump's, and this was, let's see. Yeah, just the same conversation with different links. He's using that as to back up what he's saying because there's no declared war, no invasion, no predatory incursion. This is exactly what Bruce was saying a week ago, more than that. But he says Trump's evocation of the Alien Enemies Act claimed that one, Tren de Aragua is a foreign nation or government. It's not, because it's controlled by Venezuela. It's not, as best we can tell. And two, that the gang was perpetuating an invasion of and a predatory incursion against the United States with its criminal acts. I mean, that's an stretch of the reality at best. It's not you'd have to, this is the case of a lot of these things. This would have to be proven in regard to being, if Congress decided to hold these people accountable, which it never will, being Venezuelan driven. Now, let's realize if MS-13 was founded in the United States, and on top of that, the people they've already sent were a mix of what they claim were Tren de Aragua, most of which weren't, or MS-13. So they can't even equally apply this to show you there's some kind of organized Tren de Aragua invasion. That's the only one they claimed. This is, however, the overwhelming weight of historical evidence, as cited by the judge in this case on May 1st, makes clear that when Congress wrote the Enemy Aliens Act in 1798, invasion and predatory incursion referred specifically to military action. Here are some of the examples cited by the judge. I mean, this is all very clear. So what's funny is it becomes some Democrat attack on Trump's authority. That's all they can do. It's not the case. I mean, you can look for yourself. If you can acknowledge that the information of the act itself is invalidated by what they're saying, then you're not an honest person. And J.D. Vance simply steps up and says, no, a judge can't decide that. I highlighted it's the president's decision, he told Brett Baer on Special Report, laying the groundwork for a constitutional confrontation over American authority. His declaration followed the ruling earlier Thursday by Trump-appointed judge Fernando Rodriguez. that it was unlawful, that was this word, for the administration to use the 18th century wartime law to detain and deport alleged trendy Iraqi members. Quote, if you tell the president he can't deport illegal criminals, you're saying he can't be president. And here we are yet again, this lazy old back and forth. Who is saying he can't deport criminals? Nobody. Literally nobody is saying he can't do that. He can't use this act from 1798 to deport them without due process. That's what the whole game was. If you wanted to go through the normal process, of which you then go, oh, that will take too long, making our point, then he has that option. But if the best you can do, little Marco Rubio, is to try to conflate these into saying, you're trying to say we can't deport illegal aliens. No, no one is saying that. Then that shows you that you have no argument. He says, we will reject that. And so will the Supreme Court. And you're wrong, because every time the Supreme Court has continued to back up this argument. 9-0, 7-2, most of the conservative judges. But how insane is that? The best he can do is try to conflate those two things. You realize they've been deporting people behind all this. That's already been happening. So he's lying to you, and he knows it. That's desperation, in my opinion. Now, to finish with a point about, more lies, more broken promises as we're winning, and promises made, promises kept. It keeps getting jammed down everyone's throat. The reality is this is not going a good direction. David Icke highlights what, same thing I see. Mario on message as usual. Mario Nawfal just being like this PR agent for the new mainstream alternative media propaganda arm. He says, now we want rid of cows and chickens for synthetic meat. And we want to justify another fake vaccine pandemic, right? How can we do that? Well, here comes Mario. Bird flu leveling up and the U.S. is not ready. And killer flu is spreading through cows, chickens, and now this sounds exactly like what Republicans used to call out coming from the corporate media, right? Weird. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same story. It's the same flat argument about the bird flu. We've gone over this many times. The evidence around this does not show what they're claiming. This is a corporate argument. Now, look, I'm not saying you could take your own responsibility for your health. Wash your hands. Be sanitary. But the idea that we need to start killing animals is exactly what the Trump administration before this was pushing back on. RFK Jr., we can't kill all the chickens. Well, here we are floating the idea of doing exactly that. Hasn't happened. But my point is this is coming out now being leaned into by the mainstream alternative media that we have a potential problem. Realize after they just put out the idea that, COVID was a real thing and it was China. So here we go. Get ready for the next game. I hope not. But it does begin to feel like there's some laying out the table for this. I just think it's worth laughing at that this is what you're getting from people like this. I mean, basically doing the hype for them, which is exactly what we always talk about. Well, here's an interesting overlap. This is a report from April 30th. This is from Wired.com. RFK Jr.'s HHS orders labs studying deadly infectious diseases to stop research. Now, what's funny about this, I saw this being framed on Twitter as sort of like, see, he's shutting it all down, who clearly didn't read the article. This is a little bit more interesting. This is being framed that way when in reality, it seems like there might have been a problem. Well, if you remember, Fort Detrick, which we're talking about here, is a central part of this ongoing, either it's a ploy or they're really this incompetent. Remember, I think it was 7, now I'm going to forget the actual statistic. Like it was something like one time every, I'm going to say it wrong. We cover this a lot during this time frame. The point is Fort Detrick is riddled with examples of having mistakes, like every single week for a long period. That was the government statistic. Even with anthrax, this is where they claim it came from. I think they use this place as this kind of dynamic. But COVID-19, people bringing things out on their shoe in a wastebasket, that's what we're talking about. This is a BSL-4 lab. Ebola, coronaviruses, the highest level. And we get this many things. So it's just wild to me. But as we see the direction going forward, as we'll show you in a second, more mRNA jabs, more vaccine platforms, shutting down this lab, even if that's actually what's happening just because we think Fort Detrick is bad, to me seems like an after effect. Sort of like pointing at all the problems as you build out the new technocratic prison. Well, if you point out the problems that you no longer need, are you really being honest? In this case, shutting this down when we're now beyond the gain of function building, we're well beyond this. We are now at a level of, it takes a whole conversation to explain where I think this is going. The point is, this may be bringing something down that's no longer necessary for the idea of showing you that we're stopping those things. But read into the article, it gets very interesting. It says, an email by Michael Holbrook, Associate Director for the High Containment at the Integrated Research Facility, says the lab is terminating studies on Lassa fever, SARS-CoV-2, and Eastern Equine Encephalitis, or EEE, a rare but lethal mosquito-borne disease. Well, here's what's interesting. They don't mention SARS-CoV-2, COVID, or anywhere in the rest of this. It's also worth considering that as we become more invested in this, that the awareness around who is responsible, which, I mean, is the U.S. government, along with China, whoever else involved. That's why everyone laughed at that report they put out. It's the evidence is shockingly obvious that at the very least they're involved with it from the very beginning. The point is, maybe they're covering up what people are seeing. Maybe they're shutting this down because it did start there, as we talked about right at the beginning of this, and circulated around the nursing homes with the ground grass opacity and the vaping illness, or the beginning of the Wuhan military games, and then cascaded everywhere else. Or it was done in a deliberate fashion. The point is, or it was nothing at all, by the way. The point is that by shutting this down, you may very well be hiding one of those points. China responded to the proximal origin point that Trump put out, saying we can prove many ways over that it started, at least there's evidence of it everywhere else before that, which is very obvious. With the reports like this 10 times over during the COVID-19 illusion, showing you that it was Canada, France, Taiwan, Japan. I mean, many of them did their own studies that say, look, we can verify this being here in 2019. And nobody cares about that? You could still argue that China did it and they just started it earlier. The point is the evidence got ignored, which tends to show you they needed these starting points for propaganda reasons. Either way, interesting that's included. But it says, the email says representatives from the Department of Homeland Security were padlocking freezers in biosafety level 4 labs, those with the highest level of biosecurity safety, containment used for studying highly dangerous microbes. Padlocking freezers? Kind of seems like a little bit of a cover-up, but it says, in an email statement provided to Wired, Bradley Moss, Communication Director for the Office of Research Services at NIH, confirmed the halt in research activity. He says, quote, NIH has implemented a research pause, referred to as a safety stand down. That sounds a bit different, at the Integrated Research Facility at Fort Detrick. This decision follows identification and documentation of personnel issues involving contract staff that compromised the facility's safety culture. Promoting this research pause. Wait a minute, so that's not shutting down a place because we don't want the research. That sounds like a leak. At least that's what they're framing it as. During the stand down, no research will be conducted, and access will be limited to essential personnel only to safeguard the facility and its resources. Do you remember what happened right before COVID-19 timeframe? Fort Detrick was shut down because of a safety issue. I'm telling you guys, this could be nothing, or this could be them building another repeat narrative. I don't want to hype up any conversation because I don't want to do their job for them, but it's right in front of us. I mean, these things are relevant in the time frame of last time. Now we see they're telling you they just had a compromised facility safety culture. That's exactly what we got before. Now it says, Moss did not elaborate on the nature of the personnel issues and said he did not know how long the research pause would last. Staff have not received an anticipated reopening date. Well, that's wild. Now here, let's play this really quickly, see if I still have that in here. Yeah, let me play this one really quickly. Now, this is a little bit the longer one, but it's important to see this. This goes back well before the COVID-19 illusion timeframe. This is about like a documentary done on Fort Detrick, and this is what we're dealing with. Now, I think there's a sort of like we've seen in Georgia, the country. People call out about the U.S. lab there that just tests all over these people, and you can prove it, and no one cares. I think that's what this is. And I think now I'm worried about how that will play into the next conversation.
I visited the town of Frederick, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., and met a lot of people who were suffering or had family members who had died from rare illnesses. And one thing they all had in common was a theory that the source of these rare illnesses was a local army base called Fort Detrick and some of the secret activities that have been going on there for decades.
I lived on Elm Street, and on the side of the road that I lived on, just counting the 6 houses, everyone had cancer.
So my daughter, at the age of 28 years old, was diagnosed with brain cancer. Then my second daughter gets sick and has tumors in her womb, and they said that this was not genetic but environmental. About a year after that, my wife then gets renal cell carcinoma and dies a year later after that. We have over 1,300 documented cancer victims right now, just in a 1 mile radius. I'll be quite honest with you, it's changed my life so radically, sometimes I don't even know who I am.
1,300 people in a 1 mile radius. And what's causing so much sickness? It turns out all these victims have one thing in common. They live next to a military base called Fort Detrick.
In history. Oh, dang it. Hold on.
I visited the town of...
Well, crap. I don't want to play it again. I thought that was going to be the opening. It goes on to play a little bit more, but that's enough. I mean, it's just insane how obvious that is, how long that's been talked about. And then we have this weird thing right before whatever COVID-19 was, and nobody talks about that. I covered that extensively for the first year. But now we have the proximal origin. It's just so lazy how easy it is to pull people along with political narratives when they need you to look. Now, the point about all of it, guys, I only showed you that because it's interesting, right? The Wired article, that's just in case something happens, keep that in mind, and we'll remember that. But what's happening in the administration just shows you that this is business as usual. And some of us have the integrity to call it out, like Mary Talley Bowden. We have opened Pandora's box, she says. These are all the mRNA products in the pipeline, according to Grok. Look at that. I mean, it's the amount of mRNA shots, let alone platforms, are exploding. Estimated mRNA products, 310 plus around one dynamic, and that's one company. Moderna, 48. BioNTech, 29. CureVac, which is Elon Musk, 19. Pfizer, 10, with an asterisk, whatever that means. But the point is, maybe uncertain 10, 11, Sanofi, these are all mRNA. That includes the one that the U.S. government is currently putting forward on bird flu, or all the others that were already working that have not stopped, like the Ferritin Nanotech universal shot for flu. All these are very real. I thought he was going to stop all of this. Isn't that the promise? RFK Jr., well, we've talked about Stargate. Trump partners with technocrats to promote mRNA injections, AI, transhumanism, right? That was Stargate. That was $500 billion. This is a new one. Not the same one. RFK Jr. bets $500 million on universal vaccines in shift from COVID-19 funding. Now, again, you may see the headline and go, yay, see, he doesn't like COVID, except what he does in this, which if you actually read it, is simply pivot that money into universal COVID shots along with flu. That's what this is. So it didn't really change anything. Now, the mRNA point, maybe that changed, or maybe they're just hiding it from you at this point. I don't know why we would trust any of this. I mean, you have to realize that if the whole plan was to get this stuff in everybody and ultimately push back, what would be the best way to fool you into trying it again? Taking the person who is seen as the one pushing back and letting him roll out something that's different this time. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. Who knows? If you're not willing to question that, then you should reflect on that. But what's fascinating to me is that we know as a matter of fact that we were lied to 40,000 times over. That'd be a lot in that conversation. And now they tell you we're going to shift away from that. Still COVID, still universal flu shots, which that's what Fauci was going towards. That was all this was sort of built around, but just not mRNA. How do we trust that? How do we know? Or even if it's not, isn't this supposed to be a problem that we're giving people shots for something around COVID-19 that half of his base doesn't even think exists? Or the idea that we're building universal shots in general that are based on multiple antigens that in and of themselves cause different problems that we've already talked about. I mean, it's not just the mRNA, guys. But let me read through this. In a shift away from next generation COVID-19 vaccines, so next generation being the point, the Trump administration is investing $500 million in a vaccine project championed by two scientists who were recently tapped to serve in senior roles within the NIH. According to emails received by Wall Street Journal. Now, remember that RFK Jr. has been highlighting problems in injections long before mRNA, like MMR, for example, which he now tells you is safe and effective, even though nothing has changed. That should weigh on your mind right now, because if you're telling us that this is all okay because it's just not mRNA, and you're making these things in the same style they were before, the only thing that changes is that you trust him. And if that's where you are, then I think that's the biggest problem in the conversation, even if you can trust him, that you allow yourself to think the same thing is different because he says so. That's how we all get played. To reiterate again, even if he's right, you can't allow yourself to hope for the best and expect the worst. Verify it, right? Don't just take their words, even if because maybe he's being played. The unusually large sum comes as the nation's health agencies are cutting budgets, shrinking staff, and terminating hundreds of active research grants. The project involves producing vaccines from chemically inactivated whole viruses, which that is slightly different than some of the ones from before we've talked about. This is a throwback to how flu vaccines were made decades ago. The goal, one that scientists have chased unsuccessfully for decades, is to make, quote, universal vaccines that protect against multiple strains of viruses at once. Now, I don't know how you think you can do that with one whole inactivated, unless what we're talking about is many different, because there's far too many variations of this, if we're to believe what they say, for them to have that many antigens in one shot that can apply to every possible flu strain, or, as we'll get into, also COVID-19, and also everything else. There's no way that's possible, as I understand it, unless we're using something genetically modified, some kind of mRNA direction. I guess we'll wait and see. What I'm hoping for is you're going to get people out there that we know in this field that have the integrity to call this out, who are experts, who will rip through this, through the studies, through the information, and tell us what we're looking at. My point is, even if it's not mRNA, that dynamic has failed incredibly over and over. Fauci has been trying to do the universal flu shot for a very long time, and it's hurt people every time. That's why we don't see them. And that's why they stepped into the mRNA direction, claiming that was the new step. Now, whether we're being played and it's all the same thing or not, this is not what we should want, in my opinion. Now, I mean, look, if we understand what even RFK's been saying before, even the flu shot itself is a problem. The flu shot itself before this was increasing metaviruses, increasing coronavirus risk, 36% increase in illness, according to the Pentagon study that RFK talked about. And now it just seems like we're going the wrong direction. As we understand it, as even it tells you with measles and the rest, people get sick, they get immunity, they get better. That is the direction he was telling you before. And now it seems we're leaning back into the vaccine direction. It says the shift appears to be a makeover of the Biden administration's Project Next Gen. Well, look at that. Every single time. So if it's the Biden's plan they're taking over, does that mean they're the deep state now? Does that mean they're working with the Democrats? Or are you going to open your eyes and recognize that it's just one government using the same agenda? It says a $5 billion effort to fund new COVID-19 vaccines that HHS called wasteful. Several of the projects within Next Gen received stop work orders in recent weeks, but before you jump on that I'm wrong, they've repurposed it, is the point. It says the project also includes research on a second universal flu vaccine and universal coronavirus vaccines. So all they did was pull in research money from the COVID-19 plot direction that Biden was aiming at and just repurposed it to the universal direction, which, by the way, was always what they were aiming at. Look back. I was making statements about this in the beginning of COVID. It was all over the place. According to HHS, HHS aims to begin trials of universal coronavirus vaccines by 2026. Quote, with FDA approval targeted for 2029. Oh, they're giving us 3 years now to make that seem like what I'm glad they're getting more time instead of jamming them through. So ask Donald Trump then why he's okay with that when he was the one telling you last time that we can do it in 3 months. Nothing lines up here. If you're being honest with yourself, there's just new narratives are what we're getting. Our commitment is clear. Every innovation in vaccine development must be grounded in gold standard science and transparency. It's a nice statement. We'll see what happens. That's my point from before, is that just saying those things does not make them real. Saying them are what they all do, including the ones that don't do them. We should know that by now. Whether it happens or not is what matters. But if we have gold standard transparency, what does that even mean? Like, again, it's about what ultimately happens. And I think just the direction of a universal flu vaccine is what most of Maha thought he would not do. Or any of them. Many of them thought he was going to pull the entire schedule. None of that happened. And to be clear, that's RFK's statement. So he is in support of all this. This is his direction. Universal flu vaccines aim to protect against novel flu strains that could spur a pandemic and potentially seasonal flu viruses. Let's not forget, the Biden administration passed an emergency that put the regular flu under essentially a emergency dynamic. So that allows EUAs. I guarantee they're rolling this through. So my point would be when they roll this out, they probably won't need that approval. They'll say they want it now. When it comes to pass, it'll be rationalized from some new thing. And maybe RFK doesn't want that and he gets overruled. You don't know. All of this is the same establishment with the same thing, the same NIH. It's the same thing. In fact, the guy they're using, this guy, was part of Fauci's NIH. No, yeah, there were different parts where he pushed back against what Fauci argued, but he's part of Fauci's NIH. That means that even if he disagreed, he's still a part of this dynamic where they lied to you and knew that they lied to you. And now he's helping RFK build this platform. And that's the thing, guys, to jump ahead quickly. It's a platform. This is May 1st. And HHS, NIH launched next generation universal vaccine platform. So explain to me how you have a platform without mRNA. I've loved you to break that down for me. Coming back to that. It says universal flu vaccines aim to protect against novel flu strains and seasonal flu and everything else have for decades been the goal of scientists, including Anthony Fauci. But no one has succeeded. In fact, they've failed is the point over and over and over. The primary vaccine that is part of Generation Gold Standard. It's so funny, the gold standard, the golden age, all of which have these weird overlaps with like Zionist propaganda. There's so many weird things happening around this, but here they are. They're calling this the Generation Gold Standard. BPL 1357, that's one of them. These are the shots they're working on, the ones they're telling you about, has so far completed one preliminary safety trial with 45 participants. An HHS official said further trials are under development. The other vaccine, BPL 24910, has been tested for toxicity, according to the contract issued by HHS, but didn't appear to have any clinical trials listed in the National Registry. BPL 1357 is the universal flu vaccine that consists of 4 types of inactivated flu virus. Well, how is that a universal flu shot if it's only addressing 4 of what they claim is out there, assuming any of those even really exist? That, to me, seems like an interesting point, because that wouldn't be universal. It would be, even they're the ones that tell you that every year there's an endless amount of these different possibilities, but those ones that tend to kind of circulate. But they change. So that means they would have to change this every time based on new. I think the point is, in my opinion, is if you're using even 4, as we've already talked about, it's even Fauci and others have made the case, 4 different antigens, those things act differently in your body. They don't respond. That's why they failed in the past, is that you then have your body creating antibodies for different things that you're not actually fighting with, and that causes problems. In fact, I bet you I still even have that clip. Let me see. Because this point we were making a lot during COVID-19. This was specifically around what Fauci was saying about one dynamic around this early in this, but also the doctor who talked about the different vaccines regarding cats and coronaviruses, if you remember that. There's one of them right there. I think it was right here somewhere. Oh, I know what it is. It's right here. Yeah, there it is.
They're trying to train the body's immune system to target the right part of the virus, because getting it wrong can be dangerous.
We know that historically with coronaviruses, that if you do vaccinate with the wrong kind of vaccine, for instance in domestic cats who have a similar viral infection, that you can make the disease more severe.
There's another element to safety, and that is if you vaccinate someone and they make an antibody response and then they get exposed and infected, does the response that you induce actually enhance the infection and make it worse? And the only way you'll know that is if you do an extended study, not in a normal volunteer who has no risk of infection, but in people who are out there in a risk situation. This would not be the first time, if it happened, that a vaccine that looked good in initial safety actually made people worse.
Now, what's incredible about that is you could make that statement and then go on to deny forever that that's what actually happened. But what he's saying is the same point that applies here, right? So so essentially, if you're giving them a shot that has 4 different produced antigens that can create antibodies that for those things, well, then in essence, 3 of them will be fighting the wrong thing. Now, I went through this with other people that are much more knowledgeable on this. People that are in this field where the argument is and this is in the past, like I've shown you why they've failed. So what changes? I get the sense, my gut's telling me that this is not a shift. This is about trying to give you another explanation for why we're really still using the same platform. And again, I'll go into the article. Let me finish the article. We'll come back to the platform point because it's the same. This is the same shots. BPL 1375. Okay, so it's a platform though. And understand the platform is the plug and play Moderna point about a platform where all you need to do is enter in the new antigen that creates a new shot. That to me is the mRNA platform. Now, maybe there's a way you could do the same thing with that mRNA. Again, I'm not the expert, but I do see all the same points in all of this. And I worry that this is just another ploy. But it goes on to say, make sure you got the screen. Okay. A universal flu vaccine that consists of 4 types. The whole virus cocktail is delivered in the, oh, and this is interesting as well. The whole virus cocktail is delivered in the nose or by injection. Now you realize, going back to the whole version, they claim it's in fact activated, but there's all sorts of evidence of the past ones where people do get sick. They've even admitted that, whether it's by mistake or something else, where you take the shot and then you get the thing that you're getting the shot for because it's a whole virus. If you believe, now again, I'm not saying I'm buying all the narratives. Yes, consider whether we even have the wrong dynamic around this, the theory, but overall is what they're claiming. I find that interesting. And here, and this just really quickly, is one of the ones they're working on. It says inhaled COVID vaccine, or just being made in general. Now it says when a vaccine is inhaled, the body's immune system responds in a different way than when it's injected. Now there's many overlaps to this. There's just like a nasal spray, but there's also ones that are like an aerosolized, like nanotech dynamic. The new vaccine, this one's called Shire, however you pronounce that, targets 3 different proteins in SARS-CoV-2 virus to improve the vaccine's ability to protect against new strains. Same thing. Now, then you jam those together with some other flu overlap. Like if they're telling you they're going to make one that applies to all of them, including coronavirus, which is what they are saying eventually, then that means at the very least, if you're talking about the old styles, it has to also produce antigens for that. This sounds insane. And our bodies have already shown everybody that these things are not okay. I mean, well before COVID-19. An AeroVax trial is a phase 2 clinical trial funded by Canadian Institutes of Health and Research. The AeroVax trial will evaluate if this new COVID-19 vaccine is safe to give by aerosol inhalation to people who have been vaccinated with at least 3 doses of the original one. My God. And I just want to include the point. This is just one of the many articles. This is an MIT study. New dual use. New aerosolized mRNA delivering nanoparticles can vaccinate or they can eliminate. That's what they went into. That's dual use tech. That's a bioweapon, guys, if you use it in a different way. So let's not forget where this is going. Now, it says whole virus vaccines can be produced quickly, which makes them potentially useful in a pandemic context. Now we're back to like floating the idea of pandemic preparedness. I mean, it's strange to me how much you can highlight the business around that and then still do the same things. They're also provoke a good immune. Now, look, I'm not saying in regard to the idea that, like, I believe, based on many different things from the past that I've shown you, both from HHS employees and the WHO, that say this is a racket. Like, let's see if I can even pull this one up. This is the one that usually pops up. Damn, keep typing it wrong. There it is. Oh, no, that's not it. Let's see. Oh, damn it. Is that it? That's so weird how that happens. Nope. Was it more than influenza? There it is. Got it. So I'll include this. Make sure you read it for the 100th time. I won't do it again. The point is, you could read through this, and I've even gone over what these two have done since. The point is, they make it very clear. It's about a culture of fear, that they're using worst case scenarios to hype up fear to drive vaccine sales. And the HHS document that I've used, it's a statement from people that are, on HHS website, that they're just simply using this to push more injections. I mean, they make it very clear, talking about disease experts like Fauci, pushing this for their interest. It's obvious what this is. You know what I mean? And so if the point is we can look back and see that, then we have to recognize that they've constantly, even the lies about most of these things we've seen, even going back to the Spanish Kentucky flu is what it really was. The proof showing you it started in the United States and the U.S. government lied about it. There's so much lie. Everything we have root in this conversation are based around lies. So I just don't know why we should keep going forward with this same dynamic, even if it's a pivot claimed away from mRNA. However, it says the trade-off is that they more frequently, the ones they're producing, produce mild side effects. Think about that. So they're literally comparing this to the mRNA shot, saying we're doing this with whole virus, the old way, right? But the difference, the trade-off, is that the whole virus one has more frequent side effects. So you're telling me that we're comparing, so this, and realize this is coming from the administration for the most part. I mean, this is Wall Street Journal writing about it, but they're using the arguments coming from the NIH. So the point is, you're literally trying to pretend that one, the mRNA shots didn't have that, which is insane that we're still pretending that we're lying about that. And then saying that the problem is this one will have more side effects. But it's hard to read that because they're saying more mild side effects. But in the comparison that the mRNA didn't have the same thing. So it's hard to read that. To me, it seems to suggest that this will have worse side effects in the context of the old verse. Like basically that they're claiming this has more likelihood to cause the mild side effects is what they're saying. Now, whether it's the mRNA by itself that causes that or whatever, it's the multiple antigens or even just the lipid, whatever particles they're using to make this happen. The information shows us that all the different pieces to this, going back to MMR and everything else, are all part of the problem. Or the glyphosate they find in them, or everything else we've seen. So my opinion is that's an alarming statement. And I think we should be very careful about these things going forward. You take your own, do your research, talk to your doctor if you think that's going to make a difference, and educate yourself on these things. Because I think what we're dealing with is either a continued captured agency here through him or not, or it's always been the same thing. I hope I'm wrong, obviously. I mean, this entire thing is terrifying. The money is to come from the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. Of course, it's BARDA, a center within the HHS that funds measures to protect the public from it. So it's the same thing. All these broken things that were shown to lie to you and used, and now we're just all still using them. Just different face in front of it. Former and current HHS officials who requested anonymity told the Journal they're startled by the size of the award. NIH labs are typically funded with their respective institutes with money appropriated by Congress. For fiscal year 2023, the NIH, or rather the NIAID, where Mamoli and the people working on the current project conduct their research, had $856 million budgeted for more than 120 staff scientists. A $500 million transfer seems like an astronomical number for this one thing. So it just shows you, and that's Rick Bright, by the way, the one calling out the dark winter. And, as we've talked about, he seems like he's all part of the same thing. A flu vaccine expert, and he's the one talking about the universal flu shot back then. And former BARDA director who left in 2020 after clashing with that HHS leadership. So he's just kind of pointing out that's a lot of money for this one thing, which shows me that it is likely about this. So HHS, NIH launch next generation universal flu platform. Now it's saying the universal development of the next generation universal vaccine platform, of course, called Generation Gold Standard. That's what it's called. The platform is called that. Think about that. Using a beta, how do you say this, propiolactone inactivated whole virus platform. Now, this is what I'm going to do more research into in general, just to get more educated on what these things mean, the differences within them, how it might be overlapped. That's what I do for you. Coming soon. But the point is that this is the same, health, what do you call it? Like a consolidation of this same problem. Now, candidates BPL 1357 and BPL 24910, all those we just talked about, these vaccines aim to provide broad spectrum protection against multiple strains of pandemic prone viruses. See, like H5N1, avian flu. They have an mRNA one going too, and coronaviruses and MERS. I don't know how in the world do you think that's possible without something like mRNA? And again, I'm not saying, I'm just asking that question. I'm looking forward to understanding this more, but I think that doesn't make sense with what I know, but I could be wrong. Our commitment is clear. Every innovation in vaccine development must be grounded in gold standard science and transparency and subjected to the highest standards of safety and efficacy testing, says RFK Jr. We'll see. I certainly hope that's the case. The BPL platform is fully government owned and NIH developed. Now, what's interesting is they're framing that as like a positive change, which maybe it is, in regard to like the Fauci personal enrichment dynamic we saw from the NIH during COVID, where they had like personal patents and they were all making money. Now, which is better? I mean, obviously that individual part seems more corrupt, and I think just by default is. But if the government owns this, is that just not a transfer of the same problem to? Or I mean, there's two ways to look at it. The government dynamic is what worries me more than anything. But secondarily, that ultimately you have the government right now is in a weird position where you have people enriching themselves like crazy through the government. I mean, the entire Trump administration right now, and I don't think it's any different. I just think right now it's been very public that they're all, I mean, Trump and his crypto things. I mean, there's so many weird, very obvious, like for example, his son started some kind of executive club branch where it's like a club where people can get access to executive branch. I thought that was illegal, quite frankly. But my point is that if it's the government right now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to profit through that just the same way. Put it that way. But in addition to influenza and coronavirus, the BPL platform is adaptable to future use against respiratory RSV. All the same things they've been aiming at, or metapneumovirus, which we've talked about, which what they were giving caused an explosion in that just the same. Parainfluenza, another point. Unprecedented capability to protect against avian influenza. Here it goes. Now, I want to just add this point again. 2019 or well before or after as well, many studies have come out from the U.S. government saying things like this. Compulsory moral bioenhancement should be covert. Now, I argue the same thing could have been said about the last time, and they just got caught. But what I worry about is just because they're saying that's not what this is, doesn't mean we should blindly accept that, whether you support the administration or not, because they have roundly argued that when these things should happen, that we shouldn't be told about it. Now, it says, this is just one of them, but look it up. It's a very prominent thought process along the elitists like the Andreessens and Thiels and the rest. It says, some theorists argue that moral bioenhancement ought to be compulsory. Now, bioenhancement could be any number of things, but in this case, like an mRNA genetically altering dynamic, that's one of them. He says, I take this argument one step further, arguing that if moral bioenhancement, the moral word they're using, ought to be compulsory. So in their mind, if it should be forced, then its administration ought to be secret, covert, rather than obvious, overt. This is to say that it is morally preferable for compulsory moral bioenhancement, forced genetic manipulation, to be administered without the recipient knowing that they are receiving that enhancement. His argument for this is that if moral bioenhancement ought to be compulsory, so they set that tone apparently, then its administration is a matter of public health, according to their set narrative. And for this reason should be governed by public health ethics. Insane to say that that's ethical, to secretly do something because you've decided it's in our best interest. That's government for you, ladies and gentlemen. And that's where we are. He says, I argue that covert administration of a compulsory moral bioenhancement program better conforms to public health ethics than does an overt compulsory program. Well, yeah, because in other cases, you're publicly forcing it down their throat, whereas over here, you're secretly doing it. So we all at least don't know we're being lied to. Insane. So think about that in the context of whether this might be the same thing called something else. Lastly, a few points here. Holden Colada says, RFK Jr. just revealed that all new vaccines will require placebo tests. So it's the same point, the gold standard direction. But we're saying things is not action. Now, frankly, I think a lot of these will happen. I get the sense that a lot of this is either what he needs to do to appease some of these people, or maybe he still wants to. Maybe he's being blackmailed, like we talked about, and he really wants to change things. Like I get the sense that part of that is something going on. But he goes, this is what Maha voted for. Now, Maha did not vote for him to say things out loud. The frustrating thing is that they're just going along with what they're saying, or like we said earlier, that the emotions are what drive you, not the facts. Right now, it is so obvious that in partisan politics, whatever they say last is what they think is happening, or pretend is happening. When he does that in one part, that's what they're voting for. But I haven't seen it happen yet. He says that none of the vaccines on the CDC's childhood recommended schedule were tested against inert placebo, meaning we know very little. Okay, I agree with that. Now, explain for me why, if that's the case, and he says it's the case, which is why he's claiming we need to do this now, he's still allowing the shots right now to be given to children. Explain that for me. Explain how it makes sense to allow the schedule to be the same, which they have to increase, to say MMR shots are safe and effective, to be okay with mRNA shots being exploding if you know they haven't been tested along real placebos. Now, we made this case during COVID-19 where we said, look, if that's a meningitis vaccine, they're not even using saline. I got so much pushback for that. The point is, they haven't been doing that for a long time. It says HHS is now building surveillance systems that will accurately measure risks of vaccines. Good. How long will that take? What about all the children right now still taking COVID shots because Trump said they should? What about all the other shots they'll be giving by the time they're 1 year old? I guess those ones are the suffer. I mean, you get the point. I don't get it. I just don't. I mean, even there's always the argument you give that's which you don't know for sure. It's like, well, they can't do it all at once. Well, they can't X, Y, and Z. Well, you don't know that. But I also know that if you were honest had integrity, you would say these things. Well, we can't stop it because of X, Y, and Z, but I don't think you should take these. They're dangerous. Do you hear that? I haven't. It's insane that we can't see how clear that is. Now, lastly, Benny Johnson, Mr. Cheerleader, says Tulsi Gabbard is investigating Dr. Fauci for perjury and his role in funding Wuhan gain-of-function research to COVID. Oh, you mean like everybody in the U.S. government did publicly, along with Trump's side, Biden's side, everybody? I mean, it's just such these people are so ridiculous. But here's what I said. Well, that sure feels highly reactionary and tactically timed, doesn't it? Seeing as how everybody was calling these things out and saying, where are all the arrests? And where? No, I'm investigating Fauci all of a sudden. Okay, I hope it's real. And I said, how about we follow through any of the other ones first? You know, the Epstein file, JFK. No, we'll keep sporadically jumping around. Now we're looking at this one. Now we're thinking about that one. And every time it's like, see, we're winning. We did it because they said we're going to. You know how often, even when they mean it, those things don't happen? They know that. They don't care. This is a grift. I said, I'll cheer it when it truly happens. And I will. Until then, it's just more U.S. government noise. I sit down here and blind cheerleading of government promises by the likes of Ben Johnson. Right? I mean, that's what this is. And of course, Alex Jones, same thing. Bombshell! Tulsi's going to investigate Fauci. I mean, have they even officially started an investigation? Do you really think that's going to happen? Do you think Donald Trump is going to allow that to happen, knowing that he is equally complicit with everything that happened? Come on, guys. We can't be this easy to manipulate. You just can't let people like this mislead you when it's that simple. Again, if there's an investigation, I will cheer it on. Now, what I said, despite still being logical, maybe there's a reason she doesn't care. I don't know. Nonetheless, it's about action, not words. And all they do is cheer on the statements of the day. You know, like the Ukraine war is over. How'd that work out, Jones? How'd that work? It's not just him. He's a very glaring example of people who are out there misleading you, whether they even know it or not, which I find almost impossible not to notice that he does. But we'll see. But everything else we're seeing, you know, Donald Trump literally still tells you the shot is safe and effective and good for people. And yet here we are acting like he's the only one responsible. What did I tell you before? That he was the scapegoat. It seemed pretty clear to me at some point, and maybe that will be the case. Maybe they think they can throw him under the bus and act like he was the only one that did something, even though Trump still pretends those shots are helping everybody. Even Fauci, in his article from Cell.com, argued they failed, and yet they still use them. Now, lastly, on top of everything else, adding to one more example of how we seem to be going in the wrong direction, the U.S. has now approved CRISPR pigs for food. Now, this is a huge difference from what we were being told before. I mean, in particular, RFK Jr. was calling out GMO foods, which this is one of them, genetically modified organisms. Pigs whose DNA makes them resistant to viruses. And who knows what that could cause down the line. Like, this is the problem, is that they're playing, I mean, it's like Frankenstein. They're playing God with this. And the ultimate point is that we don't know what the side effects will be with everything else we keep seeing. All of the wild side effects. Look at the COVID shot, for crying out loud. We have you name it, and these injections in some way overlap with causing, you know why there's such a wide, I argue this is part of the design, but why it was such a wide spectrum of possible side effects? Because it was just like a genetic modification that was causing people's bodies to go all crazy. And many of which you could see pretty consistently, but some people had different reactions to it. And then it becomes like this impossible thing to prove because it's all over the map. Overall, regardless of what you think of any of that, this is not what he said he would do, in my opinion. Hopefully you can decide for yourself. Now, personally, I don't want any of this because we've talked a lot about the fake meat from Gates. Maybe the reaction was to get you to accept this. Problem, reaction, solution is always worth considering. The pigs will join a very short list of gene-modified animals that you can eat, they're telling us. The U.S. took about 20 years to approve transgenic salmon with an extra gene that let it grow faster. But by early this year, its creator, Aqua Bounty, has sold off its fish farms and only has 4 employees, none of them selling fish. Well, what does that tell you, U.S. government? That we don't want your gross genetically modified foods, but they're going to do it anyway because that's what they want. Now, of course, they try to make it sound like that's because regulations and nobody, there is so much pushback against that fake salmon. People don't want it, but that's not the point, right? They don't care what you want. That's the point. It says regulations have eased since then. Now, also worth asking why that's happening when most Americans don't want that, especially around gene editing. That's why. Which tinkers with animals' own DNA rather than adding it to it from another species, as is the case with the salmon and many GMO crops, or the shots they jam down your body, or down your throat, but in your body. Genus-edited pig embryos to remove the receptor that the PRRS virus uses to enter cells. No receptor means no infection. Okay, well, ask yourself something. No infection, as we were well-versed on during the COVID-19 lie, does not necessarily mean not infectable, right? So what happens if we get in this conversation? Now, again, I'm just theorizing. Don't jump down my throat about germ terrain theory here. The point is the idea, based on their argument, playing from the side of the germ theory, arguing as if, remember this point during COVID, the point is that if we're talking about this being something that they, basically they don't have the ability to become infected by nonetheless the thing that's in their body. Well, they're not showing anything, but does that mean that it's not, that it still could be in their body? Whatever that means, let's just call it nanotech or whatever you want to think it is. So when you then don't see the problem, but then use that pig and break it down, does that then end up in the food you're eating? Because they never were aware it was there. And what if it becomes a mass spread thing where they all have it now because nobody gets sick and nobody dies and nobody fights it off? Now all of a sudden, every piece of food you eat in pig has that in it. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but doesn't that seem like a logical overlap to this? My point is that they never think these things through in the regard. This is the experiment as opposed to seeing what will happen in the experiment and then going forward every time. It says the pigs appear entirely immune to more than 99% of the known versions. So not entirely. So now you've got a 1% overlap, which guess what happens when that's happened in the past? Whether it's the mosquitoes or other points, it becomes the opposite. It literally creates this like resistance dynamic that causes us to explode in a new way. Or what if that drives the virus itself, if you believe that, to become a new version of itself? And what's it called? What was it called? Leaky vaccine point, where it causes it to become a new thing and more dangerous. I mean, these are all basic ideas. And if I can just rattle these off, knowing that this is a possibility, we should be considering these things. But, it's certainly possible that they have something they've done to make sure that doesn't happen. So all I'm saying is that I don't want this. And I think most Americans don't as well. And I'm adding on the point that we don't know, and neither do they, what the long-term consequences of this will be. I sure don't want to find out. Now, it says research is ongoing to make pigs, as well as other livestock, invulnerable to other infections. So that means other genetically modified pieces of animal. Now, that's the largest point. Whatever you think the real side effects, if any, are, I don't want fake genetically modified anything in my life. And I think most people feel the same. They're using CRISPR to make these animals, or to, add this gene, edit it, which my point will be eventually they'll be making them, which we already know that overlap is there. But there is still a way to go before. And then the point is, if they're making them, which we know that's possible, at least they tell us that, how is that different than Gates with fake meat? Right? I mean, just because they're not making a lab does not change the fact that the whole animal was fake and made from. So maybe there is a backdoor here in getting you to accept the one that comes from the side you like. But it says, but there's still a way to go before gene editing bacon appears on the shelves in the U.S. And hopefully, like the salmon, we push back on it. But it says, before it makes its sales pitch to big pig farms, Genus, which is the company, says it needs to also gain approval in Mexico, Canada, Japan, China, which are big export markets for American pork. Now, in the beginning of the show, I should remember those names he rattled off, which you guys all know, the tariff overlap and the deals. Isn't it interesting? Now suddenly you've got this other overlap with most of the same countries. They're all dealing with forced trade dynamics where they need them to accept this dynamic for them to succeed. Now, it is a company, understand, but these companies almost always have backing by somebody who has power, influence over the government, or is part of it themselves. Culberson says the gene-edited pork could appear in the U.S. market sometimes next year. He says the company does not think pork chops or other meat will need to carry a label identifying it as bioengineered. There comes the largest point to me. We aren't aware of any labeling requirements. Well, hopefully you're recognizing the contradiction. That now, just because he said this, as always, because we are objective, I'm not going to say we know it'll happen. Maybe the time comes and he says, we can't do that. You're required to label it. But the reality is right now, they're already saying that based on, and they, they're dealing with the administration, they're dealing with government law. This is a big step. And they're saying we have no indication that we need to label any of this. Well, that should matter to you, seeing as how point blank asked on this direct question about should producers be required to label these kind of foods, he says, yes, consumers have a right to know. So remember that. If it happens, I'll be glad because he stood by what he said. If it doesn't, you have to remember that he claimed that, and that should be alarming to you. Now, this is also just grok. What is RFK Jr.'s stance on GMO food? RFK Jr. is critical of GMO foods, advocating for stricter regulations. That's not happening right there. Transparency, kind of, and a potential ban due to health and environmental concerns. Well, clearly not. So maybe something changed. Maybe he got new information, or maybe, just maybe, he's not what he seems. I don't know. I genuinely don't know where I stand. It's because if he's, let's say, blackmailed, for example, which is seemingly likely, that you could then make the argument that he's not the person that are forcing him to be. But it's a whole. Nonetheless, it's about what is right or wrong, what you believe in or don't. The rest is noise and possibility. That should be called out if you don't agree with it. Now, lastly, PolitiFact or whatever the point is, RFK Jr. posted on Twitter that effectively on January 20th, all GMOs will be banned. Of course, that wasn't true. That was a fake post put out by the people on the Republican side, I think, that wanted people to think that's what's going to happen, like leading into Ron Paul and Thomas Massey and all of these claims of what was going to happen, ending the war of Ukraine and Israel day one. None of that. None of the real things actually happening. And even mostly outside of that, I don't see very many examples of real positive anything, quite frankly. But overall, remember how much they wanted you to think this was the case. And now it's about watering it down and going, well, at least it's not mRNA. Well, that's not the point, though. We are not going in the right direction, in my opinion. And even the ones, if you want to say that's a small increase in benefit, are overshadowed by the worst things that are happening right now, whether it's about the Israeli infiltration, the ongoing support for genocide, the wars elsewhere that are continuing, the peace president, exploding mRNA shots. I mean, everywhere you look, guys. And what's so frustrating is that this so often gets framed as somehow Trump derangement syndrome or hating one side or the other. And it's just such a lazy argument, especially since we clearly have been roundly calling out administration after administration going back as far as we've been doing this, left or right, about the same things. But the problem is that by pretending the other side or whatever, I or whoever you're looking at just doesn't like Trump, how does that even invalidate the point you're looking at? All that means is you've created a reason to ignore what's in front of you because you've been primed with a reason to. It's how this game works today for so many people in this field. That, the Democrat or a radical judge or whatever. Yeah, those things exist. Did you even look at the information or did you just reflexively push away? That happens on left. It happens on right. It happens outside of that. It behooves us today to be as critical and as open to possibility as we've ever been. Right? Critical in regard to the government information, but open to it. That's the whole point of question everything, but be open to all possibilities. It's not as fun of a tagline, right? But that is the full picture. I believe you're there. I mean, I do. I say it all the time, but I really do believe that most people are seeing this, and that's why most of this is happening. And as we continue to grow and reach and people see the information, every day we see one more reason why they're trying to suppress this and stop this. And, it's very clear to me. But thank you for having the courage to call this stuff out. I mean, it truly, at least in my experience, in doing this for as long as I have, and I'm sure there's points before this that probably felt the same, but in my experience, truly, this is the never seen a more important time to stand up and do that. Now, I've only ever said that kind of thing a few times in my process of all this. And, COVID-19, right? Israel's genocide. I think we're seeing an escalation. And that's my point, is that I don't say these things half-heartedly or to get clicks and be bombastic about it. I genuinely think there's a real threat with this. And I've tried so hard over the years to be very careful about even making statements like that because I don't want people to react in a crazy way or to believe something is absolute when I'm only worried about it or considering these things. But right now, guys, this is a definitive problem. You're watching it happen, whether it's a constitutional crisis, whether it's Israel infiltration, to what degree is the only real debate here. It's time to stand up. It truly is time to take a stand in this and push things back. Now, I'm never talking about violence, but unless we are willing to stand up and put our name out there, our face, and say what we believe, we're not going to see a real change here. And we need to do so in a public and support each other. Share these things, whether it's unpopular or not. Make groups of your own. Make a podcast. Go out and speak. Go to protest. Go to talk to your politicians. Call people. Whatever you think is going to change, every single thing you can do could have an effect. As always, I think the least politically active thing you can do is speak to politicians or vote, but they have some level of effect in some way. I just don't really think they translate to the outcome. But my point is always is you can't just stop there. Pretending you just have to wait for the next presidential election is insane. Now is when the stuff is happening. So now is the time to do something about it. As always, TLAV needs your support, guys. As we said, what's incredible on top of everything else is as we get more reach, we seem to get less and less revenue. Now, that's not because you guys are not still donating. It's because every day I see more people that get boxed out. People that reach out and say my bank has declined my recurring donation, or that I'm unable to do this, or I get kicked off by Stripe, or to buy me or everything. And I'm going to keep doing this because I believe in it. Even if I'm, like I've said before, can't do any of this because we can't fund it, I will still be doing this and speaking about what I believe in because now is the time to do it. If you'd like to see TLAV continue and you believe in what we're doing, show us. Whether that's a note saying thank you for your work, which means more to me than you know, or $1 a month, which is all I ask for people out there to keep this platform going. You know, as much as all of you out there who continue to decide to go out and donate more, it means the world to me. You're what keep this platform going. But what we need are the new people out there who see something in this, who believe at the very least we're doing this with integrity and honesty. Show us $1 a month on the recurring platform. We will grow. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. Please make a difference. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.